Chapter 1092. Was this the magnetic mica jellyfish? Luo Nan didn't have a definite answer for a time. Even though his mental observation could be said to be at the apex of Earth, it was still extremely strenuous for him to capture more details within this marvelous magnetic structure and even decisive evidence. This was determined by the breadth, precision, and level of perception. Luckily, Luo Nan still possessed a fundamental advantage when compared to others. This marvelous existence was something he had created based on the basic design of the school of fantasy. He had combined it with actual examples to produce it step by step. He didn't rely on external machines on the production line he had established. Instead, he relied on the provisions of the laws. A crashing sound rang out on the mental plane. The heavily chained crow hummed, just like how it controlled the wraith sign in the past. It followed the special laws and regulations to permeate into the subtle and complex magnetic structure, attaching and controlling it step by step. The existence that was gradually becoming intelligent, let's call it the magnetic mica jellyfish. It instinctively rejected this situation, but it didn't know how to resist in its naive ignorance. In the end, it allowed the heavily chained crow to penetrate through the lock layer by layer, forming a firm bond with Luo Nan. From the perspective of the magneto-mica jellyfish, it shouldn't be able to understand the meaning of these fetters. It just followed its natural reaction, following the fetters and projecting its unique probing antennae in the opposite direction to point at Luo Nan. In this instant, the special clairvoyance pierced through the cloud layers of the globe, pierced through the projection path of the water vapor fake, and even pierced through Luo Nan's original frame of body and soul on the yacht in Ban City. It pointed straight to a deeper level that even Luo Nan himself wasn't too clear on. According to Luo Nan's current superficial understanding, it should belong to the fantasy layer referred to by superconfiguration theory. It formed the core of the laws of superconnection and superinterference. It pointed straight to the fundamental structural method that made Luo Nan Luo Nan Luo Nan. Yes, Luo Nan was searching for an answer from a book. In any case, the magnetic mica jellyfish carried out a warping effect on such a level. It disintegrated, reconstructed all things, and even broke through the barriers of space and time. It constructed a completely new connection that surpassed imagination. Since it possessed this kind of ability, it was necessary to possess the corresponding sensing foundation. At this moment, the magnetic mica jellyfish already manifested its transcendental talent and insight. It was because of this transcendental determinism that the magnetic mica jellyfish was destined to be born with a way of existence, growth path, and corresponding thinking and behavior pattern that was completely different from the normal life that humans understood. The mutual clairvoyance between Luo Nan and the magnetite mica didn't have much of an effect on the magnetite mica, which was practically a blank piece of paper right now. It just had an additional channel to gather information. For the magnetite mica's inconceivable wide-area perception ability, it was better than nothing. But for Luo Nan, he needed to learn and analyze if he wanted to thoroughly understand it. At the same time, the interference effect formed by the magnetic photon mica's clairvoyance naturally led to a reverse pressure. It made Luo Nan's body, which was already not that sturdy to begin with, sway a bit. This was troublesome. This gave Luo Nan a reminder. Right now, the larvae of the magnetic photon mica jellyfish that had just been ignited still had a long way to go before it was complete, but it was already showing signs of growing. It would take some more time to grow. If the difference between the two sides was too great, even as the producer and controller, the final result might not be very good. It wasn't that the magnetite mica had any ill intentions towards him, but when the target was too big and of a high level, some damage was simply unintentional. It was like a slow-moving elephant crushing a tiny ant under its foot. Alexander. So he had actually hatched such a dangerous thing. For this reason, Luo Nan needed to properly sort out the structural relationship between the two sides. Of course, the hatching brought even more benefits. Absolutely great benefits. Luo Nan thought of 4 things right now. At least 4 things. The first was obviously the inconceivable ability of the magnetite mica jellyfish itself. Whether it was the magnetite mica jellyfish's ability to achieve mass control through soul magnetization, or the stitch of any individual to form a demonic army, or the dimensional gate that pierced through the barrier of space and time to lead in the strange creatures of the outer realm, they were all unfathomably powerful methods. Even the larvae found it hard to truly realize the might of a complete body. The value of the research process alone was immeasurable. The second thing was that fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. Controlling the magnetite mica jellyfish and maintaining a close connection formed a new pressure on Luo Nan. But conversely, Luo Nan could use this pressure to further see through the flaws in the current structure of body and soul. Luo Nan had the experience and overall design to construct a perfect body, but he lacked the basic knowledge of traps. However, he was able to see more thoroughly, probe deeper, and find a more reasonable solution. So what if there were some risks? The third thing was a bit more interesting, but it was already reflected in Luo Nan's mental domain, which was currently shrouded in haze. The dark chains and the wraith sign faithfully reflected the laws of the Sunwill Absolute Prison within the chaos formed from the conflict between the Sunwill Absolute Prison and the sinful poison contamination. They guarded within. Meanwhile, within the fog palace, that was independent of it and formed from the power of the master of Zhanhe's works, the image of the magnetic mica became clearer and clearer. And it actually possessed some sort of effect. The creatures of the outer realm that Luo Nan saw in the relay station became clearer, especially the shadow cockroach. It was so alive that it seemed as if it could break through the void at any time and leap out. The most important thing was that as the existence of the individual became more prominent, Luo Nan's original fuzzy understanding of the spatial structure of the relay station gained many more reference dimensions. The results of his past thinking became clearer and clearer. Without a doubt, creating a false plane was a typical Luo Nan style of thinking that complicates a simple problem. The probability of its realization grew greater and greater as time passed. If he were to borrow the help of the Innerverse simulator, well, it was affected by the pressure of overload. It was still in a state of self-repair. Luckily, Luo Nan used other methods to buy himself some time. A plane was no longer a necessary bargaining chip for the possible threat that would occur in the high-level meeting soon. But Luo Nan would not lower his requirements for it. This was because this was one of the best tools to deal with the deep blue world Enli Wei. There was also the fourth benefit. Luo Nan had already begun to experience a portion of it. It was the wide area, high-level perception of the magnetite mica. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan had yet to figure out what was going on with the magnetite mica's perception. It seemed to be related to electromagnetism, but it was merely something on the surface. After all, his knowledge reserves were insufficient. The level of his perception was too low, and the range was too narrow. Even if the magnetite mica were to completely open up to him, there would still be large areas of the unknown. This was limited by the form of existence that humans possessed. According to Earth's current research, the forms of existence that humans could perceive and observe only accounted for about 4% of all forms of existence in the universe. With the further development of science and technology and the further deepening of the observation of the universe, this proportion would likely continue to decrease and not increase. The mental sensing mode of ability users broke through this upper limit to a large extent. But they were limited by the limitations of their own sensory organs and their long-term experience in sensing. It was hard to fully explain the increased portion. Otherwise, where did the mysterious ability of being a psychic come from? Right now, the magnetite mica provided Luo Nan with a brand new medium for his mental senses. This kind of breadth and depth was a level that was practically impossible to reach in the long natural evolutionary process of human life. Luo Nan's own abilities were largely rooted in his sensing ability. He could rely on this new medium, this new platform, to realize new breakthroughs. In comparison, the soul cloak, which used the structure of water molecules as a medium, was limited in the end. It lacked universality. It was fine in an environment rich in life like Earth, but once it rose to the interstellar realm, it would inevitably become stretched thin. Why did he think of the interstellar realm? Luo Nan raised his head. There was only the endless curtain of night covered by thick clouds above his head. Of course, on the rotating Earth, the coexistence of day and night was inevitable. The luxurious cruise ship was traveling along the 180-degree meridian from east to west. The time difference of 3 hours made it so that the sun was setting in the East Ninth District, located on the west side of the Pacific Ocean. The setting sun covered the water, and the sea was dyed in blood. This was the scene Emola saw when she took a high-speed flight from G City and arrived at the waters surrounding the Amaterasu court. If one were to say that this scenery was rare, it wasn't. But the surrounding waters were practically covered by dark clouds. It was still enough to make one's eyes light up. Especially when one came from above the cloud layer. The surroundings were covered in dark clouds, and the setting sun alone illuminated this place. The dense colors dyed the sky. It was as if the air was brushed with textures that were hard to see during normal times. It was as if there were incorporeal roots and veins that traveled through the void. They swallowed the nutrients of the world and nurtured an unknown power. Emola was very familiar with this place. After she landed, she drove the driver to the central region of the Amaterasu court. Incorporeal eyes were spying on her from beginning to end, assessing her state. She did not care about it at all. She whistled a small tune and went around the majestic main entrance of the shrine. She drove straight into the shrine through the forest lane in the middle of the dense forest. She stopped the car at a position that was only about 5 meters away from the shrine owner. Emola yawned and got out of the car. At that moment, she was still wearing the heavy makeup that made her look like she would enter a nightclub at any time. She looked completely out of place in this holy land of the Amaterasu order. Needless to say, she did not look like the Pope of the Amaterasu order. However, no one said that she was the Pope. At that moment, the bald man who was the most qualified to speak was sitting cross-legged under a tree that was so thick that it would take several people to encircle it. He was reading a book under the dim light from the canopy of the tree. He did not raise his head at all. Well, to be exact, he was flipping through a rather old notebook. Is this the legendary notebook that has the traces of the god and demon sealed in it? Let me have a look. Emola reached out her hand. The Pope moved away and avoided her hand. He did not even raise his head. You need to rest and build up your strength. Don't get distracted. Hey, didn't you invite me over to decipher this thing? The Pope flipped another page of the notebook in his hand. He still did not raise his head. He only said calmly, first, you can only be considered as assisting in the deciphering work. Second, there is a change in the direction of the current work. Oh. Can the employer change the task at will? Then you can take it as an order. Under the canopy of the tree, the air froze for a moment. Under Mola's exaggerated fake eyelashes, her gaze was cold. However, she quickly returned to her carefree state. Then, what is the order? Wait. The Pope was a man of few words. Mola did not find this arrangement strange at all. She snorted and walked straight to the Pope's side. She imitated his posture, leaned against the tree, and sat cross-legged. However, she was destined to not be too well behaved. Soon, she stretched one leg forward and raised both her hands, causing her entire body to stretch. I can tell that this is an urgent task. That's why you responded to it in a hurry. You might even look very pathetic. This does not match your usual style, but it does fit the current situation. As she spoke, Emola glanced at the notebook a few times. This time, the Pope could not be bothered with her. In fact, he did not respond at all. It was as if he did not care even if he waited until the end of time. Emola did not care about him either. She leaned against the tree behind her and even rubbed against it a few times. Suddenly, she pulled back her elbow and hit it heavily. What do you want to do to the beautiful lady? The spot where the tip of her elbow hit immediately corroded and caved in. There was a tendency for the corrosion to spread in all directions. Fortunately, it was quickly controlled. A strong vitality was transmitted over to repair the corroded tree trunk. For a moment, cracking sounds could be heard continuously. Before the repair was complete, the bark of the tree that was hit by the elbow was torn. A large number of wood fibers pierced out and quickly wrapped around and took the shape of an adult male. You rotten woman. The true god came out of the tree in exasperation. He had the appearance of a young man with a fiery temper. He was tall and strong, but when the dense wood fibers were molded, they formed a large number of patterns. Occasionally, natural spots would appear on the surface, giving people a feeling that he was almost old and inhuman. After this person appeared, he only needed to extend his hand to smash Mola's head. However, the latter did not care about this at all. He continued to lean against the tree trunk and squinted his eyes. He was a typical, catching up on sleep after a night of wild indulgence. He only muttered between his lips and teeth. "Do you look more like a tree or a person now? If it's the former, I won't say anything. If it's the latter, then treat this elbow as my congratulations to you." His voice gradually faded away. The true god lowered his head and stared at Mola using a human's method. For a few seconds, he did not speak. The Pope turned another page and spoke leisurely. "You can't really be treating her as a rotten animal, right? Who doesn't love fresh ingredients?" The true god cast a sidelong glance at his father. "Is there a need for you to beat around the bush? You can't really be treating her as sleeping, can you?" Mola's eyes were still closed, but he suddenly interrupted. "Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you a long time ago." The true god turned his head around again. "What?" "It's none of your business." "I'm asking about that father of yours." Mola's eyes were still closed as he muttered in a low voice. "I wanted to ask, did you really treat her as a foolish son and raise her?" The Pope did not reply again. However, this time, he raised his head. His gaze passed through the luxuriant canopy and branches and looked at the sky that was gradually washing away the blood and turning greenish-gray. He was so engrossed in his gaze that it was as if he wanted to capture the faint light that belonged to the stars. Chapter 1093. In low Earth orbit about 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, the Jade Dragon was silently operating. As the platform of the old Magic Cloud class internal defense circle, Jade Dragon had been operating in the low Earth orbit for more than 30 years since it was put into service, and it had the experience of firing at landlords many times. Its overall structure couldn't be said to be excellent. In the non-breaking energy-saving state, even if only the life support system and observation system maintained operation, there would still be a considerable degree of mechanical noise. Once a few more modules were opened, the treatment of "leaning against the wall is like a massage bed" was not a lie. At this moment, when the ship's adjutant Claire held onto the handhold on the bulkhead, he felt like he was holding a massage stick. However, he still relied on his 10 years of practical experience in the aerospace army to skillfully use the handhold. With just one push, he easily passed through the nearly 20-meter-long passage. Originally, he could have also calculated the opening time of the automatic sensing door, but the door of the command cabin turned out to be an antique that required a password to enter, so there was nothing he could do. Even if he opened the password-protected door, he still entered the so-called bridge without a hitch. This was the most spacious place in the entire ship. It was close to the height of a 2-story building, and it had an excellent hollow structure. There were fixed positions arranged in a spiral pattern on the inner wall, and there was also a luxurious one-piece projection tactical sand table that made proper use of the hollow structure. In Claire's opinion, this was the most eye-catching design among such antiques. No wonder the officers and soldiers, who were basically suffering from mild, moderate, or severe claustrophobia, were trying their best to fight for the duty in the command cabin so that they could avoid staying in the capsule-style dormitories or the so-called 360-degree starry sky view gyms that were like fish tanks. Of course, they wouldn't be on duty. Wouldn't it be fun to play a few luxurious AR battles with the tactical sand table? But today, when Claire came in, no one was playing games, and the tactical sand table was not even opened. About 1/3 of the seats in the command room were occupied. It seemed that they were also doing something important, and the indicator lights flickered. Claire glanced at it as if the main engine was heating up. "Good day, Commander." Claire retracted her gaze and floated to the command seat. She entered her seat and greeted Major Chow Kai, who was seated beside her. Chow Kai and Claire were both in the prime of their lives. In contrast, Claire looked slightly older, largely because of his prematurely thinning hair. However, in this weightless environment, Chow Kai's overly casual sitting posture made him look lazy and lethargic. In the face of Claire's greeting, Major Chow Kai seemed to be a bit distracted. After 2 seconds, he replied, "Is it daytime in Bus City?" "It's going to be nightfall soon in Ban City." "Ban City?" Claire was stunned. Although he was greeting in the time of his hometown, Bus City, Major Chow Kai should be from whose city? Fortunately, he looked at the operating chart of the platform and quickly understood. According to the trajectory of the airship, they would arrive in the sky above Ban City in about a few minutes. If the officer was willing to chat, the adjutant would certainly accompany him. "I haven't been to Ban City yet. I heard that the ruins at the bottom of the lake there are very spectacular. It's a holy land for diving enthusiasts." "That's Beishan Lake." Major Chow Kai's words were a bit erratic, as if there was a bit of emotion in them. His fingers unconsciously fiddled with a crystal ball that was slightly larger than a fist floating and rolling on his fingertips. In fact, it was a fully sealed fish tank with a mini octopus sealed inside. It was a strange, translucent species. Claire's gaze drifted in that direction. As far as he knew, this was transported in the name of scientific research and fell into Major Chow Kai's hands with borrowing procedures. In the end, it became a pet. Strictly speaking, dozens of people in the scientific research, logistics, and command system could suffer together, but who would care? The Magic Cloud class was an old-fashioned airship platform. Its most glorious days had already passed. Back then, they were used as space artillery platforms to bombard the nests of mutants from afar and clean up the tyrannical mutants in the atmosphere. They had made an immortal contribution to the construction of the human defense system in the era of mutation. But now, compared to the younger generation that could freely sail in the solar system, they were indeed old and could only exist as training ships and retirement ships. The Jade Dragon was especially unfortunate. Because it had to take care of research projects that could be used for both military and civilian purposes, it even lost the qualifications to train new recruits. Now, all that was left here were all floating personnel who had been transferred over according to procedures. They had enough seniority and were ready to be promoted or retired. His commanding officer, Major Chow Kai, was an unlucky guy who was about to retire when he was in the prime of his life. Only God knew why. In such an environment, no one would care about such a small detail. In fact, in space life, where birds were no longer used to the outside world, anything new and interesting would be pleasing to the eye. Even Claire himself was a bit moved by the little thing that had survived in the sealed fish tank. He was already thinking that after Major Chow Kai got tired of it, maybe he could borrow it and play with it for a few days. Of course, he couldn't do it now. In fact, as an adjutant, he had only been transferred here for a few days and wasn't close enough to Major Chow Kai and his old subordinates. For example, right now, he hesitated for a moment before deciding to make a small joke to close the distance. "If it's Sakura City. Sir should have a special memory there, right?" "Very special." The corner of Chow Kai's mouth twitched, then he took the initiative to change the topic. "You're not on duty right now." "What's the matter?" Claire shrugged. "It's just a little sensitive to the idle jitter." "Are we going to apply the brakes?" "Yes, the altitude of the platform's orbit is currently 392 kilometers. The Research Institute hopes to raise it to more than 428 kilometers to optimize the observation angle. The ground process has been completed." The words of the sugar daddy were indeed useful. Of course, Claire didn't say this out loud. After all, the sugar daddy who paid for 75% of the platform's operating costs had the right to be respected. Claire didn't take this seriously. For the aerospace army, it was already the interstellar era. This kind of old platform was nothing compared to those ships that cruised freely in the solar system. A simple maneuver of a few hundred to 1,000 kilometers was nothing. "Do you need me to do anything?" "It's not like you're on duty." "What can I do?" Major Chow Kai said casually. Claire was a little embarrassed. She could only explain in her heart that this was probably a sign that the relationship between the two sides was closer. Fortunately, Major Chow Kai had a follow-up. Since you said this, just in time. Help me supervise them to do the overall heat engine test. In addition to the engine, the other systems also have to be temporarily awakened. Clarify the status, and form a report with the test results. This is probably the last document I'll sign in the military. Claire really didn't know how to respond. She could only reply, "Yes, sir." At this moment, the sergeant in the opposite seat reported, "The main cannon power test has been completed. Do you want to continue charging?" Claire was shocked. Main cannon? Chapter 1094. The main cannon of the Jade Dragon wasn't actually a cannon at all. The Magic Cloud-class internal defense ship platform was known as a space-based weapon platform. In fact, it was limited by the conditions of the past. It was only equipped with two types of weapons according to its two main functions. One was an electromagnetic railgun used to lock onto the troublesome mutants that cruised in the upper and middle layers of the atmosphere. It had astonishing single-target killing efficiency. Everyone was used to calling it the secondary cannon. The other type was a weapon of mass destruction that was specially designed to target the mutant nests in the wilderness and the extremely powerful mutants that were beyond imagination. It was the so-called main cannon. The main cannon charging that the sergeant mentioned was strictly speaking to charge the launcher. As the military strategic posture toward the wilderness changed from a defense to a counterattack and gradually gained the initiative, new types of war weapons emerged one after another. The Magic Cloud-class platform had basically withdrawn from the front line. Now, it was only engaged in scientific research, shooting birds, and helping to clear high-altitude routes. It basically no longer carried out ground attack missions. However, it was still in a state of preparation for war. The ammunition base was reduced by half, and there was still one round of ammunition for the main cannon. Claire wasn't worried about anything else. She was worried that the soldiers on the ship, whose sense of responsibility was at an all-time low, would make a careless mistake and throw out the deadly thing in the magazine. It wouldn't explode. Without authorization from the ground, this thing was just a lump of iron. However, if it really floated in the atmosphere, they would immediately become the joke of the aerospace army. At the same time, the aerospace army would also become the joke of the entire Earth. Although there was a high chance that many people wouldn't be able to laugh. In fact, there was already a precedent for this kind of situation where people couldn't laugh. "Sir, during the dark side exercise last year, you mean the Yoda incident?" Major Chow Kai understood instantly, but he had no intention of changing his order. On the contrary, he undid the fastening buckle on his chair and floated up. During this time, he casually pushed the crystal ball toward Claire, who instinctively reached out to grab it. "So, I need my adjutant to focus. You stay here and watch for a while. I'll go clean up the internal affairs." "Yes, sir." What else could Claire say? Moreover, looking at the translucent octopus that he suddenly obtained, he felt that this was really a pleasant surprise. Normally, he would only take a few glances at this little thing from afar. This was his first time seeing it up close. He spun the crystal ball, and the little thing inside also spun, as if it was enjoying it. How did it survive? Claire had no clue at all. After two more shakes, the water sealed inside had already formed a whirlpool. This time, the little octopus instinctively went around and stuck close to the inner wall. It just so happened that its head and one of its eyes were squeezed here. Through the light of the water, it twisted into a rather absurd expression and looked over. The two of them stared at each other. This little orange-red thing was an octopus larva. Its tentacles weren't obvious, and it looked particularly adorable. However, the structure of its eyes was a little strange. Amidst the flickering watery light, it looked a little dazzling and blurry. If one looked at it for a long time, they would feel a little dizzy. Interesting. Claire was even more determined to ask Major Chow Kai for it. This time, she wasn't just playing with it. She was going to ask for the exact same one. After all, Claire had an above-average sense of responsibility. She diverted her attention and quickly returned to business. After all, he was different from Major Chow Kai. He was a transient personnel, not a retired personnel. He had accumulated enough seniority as an adjutant, and there was still a bright future waiting for him. Claire was very attentive to the task Major Chow Kai had arranged. He unconsciously played with the crystal ball while opening the tactical sand table. The large projection space that was transparent from top to bottom showed the monitoring diagram of the entire ship. He focused on the system module related to the main cannon. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he let out a sigh and continued to check the other modules. Speaking of which, Major Chow Kai's suggestion of heat engine testing was quite necessary. There hadn't been any combat missions in the past 2 years. With just the lightweight operation of the auxiliary cannon, some problems couldn't be discovered. For example, the research institute that was under their jurisdiction had actually secretly changed the backup information circuit. They should have stolen a part of the computing power of the platform. This was the F*King's serious problem, alright? What was Myra, the chief mechanic, doing? If Claire was the chief officer, he would have immediately scolded Myra, but he wasn't, so he could only write it down first and report it to Chow Kai later. Also. Hey, number 3. Claire directly reminded that lock-on operation is redundant. The tactical sand table faithfully reflected the operating status of each system module. It also pushed some highly sensitive changes to the core work area. Claire glanced at the map of the target area displayed on the sand table and half-jokingly reminded, if you really want to bomb Band City, the location is also off. It's the North Mountain Lake area. The tactical nuclear bomb in the magazine only has a yield of 50,000 tons. It can't even cover the surface of the lake, number 3. The person who answered Claire was the silent back of the number 3 non-commissioned officer. The silence lasted for at least 5 seconds, and from the second, Claire felt that something was wrong. In fact, during this time, other than the non-commissioned officer operating the main cannon in the opposite position, the one who had previously reported that the main cannon was energized, the other people had remained silent and didn't make any movements. It had been like this since he entered the command cabin. As for the one in number 3, even though he was scolded in the face, he didn't make the slightest sound. No. Claire reached for the electric beam gun at his waist. He didn't want to do anything. He still didn't understand what was going on. This action was just an instinctive reaction. But halfway through his hand, he realized that he was still holding the crystal ball in his hand, so he was stunned. It was also at this moment that his palm inexplicably felt cold, as if something cold and sticky had penetrated the outer wall of the crystal ball and made contact with him. Claire was startled and instinctively swung her hand, but she had only swung it halfway when a strong numbness spread from her palm to her entire palm, then to her wrist, elbow joints, and then like an electric shock, it instantly spread to her whole body. Ugh! Claire uttered a meaningless syllable and froze in his own seat. The fixed buckle locked his body, allowing him to maintain his previous sitting posture. There was no difference between him and the silent people in the seats. In the weightless environment, the crystal ball floated from his numb palm. The mini octopus swam inside as if it was controlling everything. Claire really suspected that the paralyzing toxin that was raging in his body was the masterpiece of the mini octopus. If that was the case, the door of the command cabin opened again, and Major Chow Kai, who had gone to clean up previously, came back in. The supreme commander of the Jade Dragon turned a blind eye to the scene in front of him, as if this was the norm on the ship. He didn't go to retrieve the floating crystal ball either. Instead, he returned to the command seat and began a series of operations. Claire, whose neck was stiff, didn't even have the strength to turn his head. He couldn't see the situation above his side and could only hear the continuous short prompts. On the tactical sand table, the light and shadow changed. The previously prominent target became clearer and clearer, and round after round of operations were carried out around it. Crazy. Claire's already somewhat numb throat made a vague sound. At this time, even if he was a fool, He could guess what Chao Kai wanted to do. A surge of blood rushed up his throat, making him roar, "Sir! Chao Kai! Is your brain eaten by bugs?" Claire didn't know why Chao Kai did this, and why he did such a meaningless stupid thing. "You're joking, right? Without authorization from the ground, even if you forcibly put a nuclear bomb on the launcher, it will only be a lump of iron. At most, it will explode in the thermosphere. Apart from a little bit of nuclear pollution, what else can you do?" Chao Kai didn't say anything and continued the corresponding operations. Claire looked at the various commands and authorization interfaces on the tactical sand table, and his eyelids twitched violently. He really couldn't understand it. Under normal circumstances, it would require 7 to 8 people to work together. How could Chao Kai, a single person, including the obviously problematic operator of the main cannon, be able to move it with just 2 people, and at such a high speed? Moreover, at least 2 links that needed to be reported to the ground were inexplicably skipped. All the authorization locks and security doors were useless. There are also accomplices on the ground? Or is Chao Kai himself a super hacker who has hidden his strength? Thousands of thoughts and thousands of doubts finally turned into one sentence: why? After saying this, Claire's mind became clearer. The reason why he asked was that he really didn't understand, and he also wanted to delay and wait for changes. Chao Kai still didn't respond and only focused on operating. Claire could only try to find something to say, trying to fight against the numbness in his throat and mouth. "Let me guess, it's because you want to retire, early retirement?" "Yes." Chao Kai unexpectedly spoke, and his answer was especially straightforward, just like the beeping sounds of his subordinates. "What kind of damned reason is that? Is that the reason you want to bomb Ban City and take revenge on society?" "First of all, I'm not bombing Ban City. Second, I'm not taking revenge on society." Chao Kai's voice didn't have the previous lazy and casual tone. "My target is, as you can see, the Ban City trade zone on Beishan Lake. The target of my revenge is also there." "Huh? Didn't I say that?" "I didn't say that because I'm a secret recipient of the mutation infection. There's a so-called infection threat, and then I'll be forced to retire." I really forgot to tell you." "Mutation?" Claire really didn't expect it to be this domain. If it's the same for everyone, then it's fine, but do you have it in the city?" "Oh, you're in Europe, then in East Asia, Spring City, that guy in Spring City, has become a hero and star. Not to mention the New World, why did I have to do this in whose city, a place like this? Directly report to the military?" Claire really wanted to shout, "This might just be a reason for someone to mess with you. But what's the point of discussing this?" In contrast, Chao Kai's target was Ban City, which was even more unreasonable. "Whose city messed with you, so you're taking revenge on whose city?" "What does it have to do with Ban City? My wife and children are all there." This reason was so powerful that Claire was suddenly speechless. Of course, this is only one of the reasons. Chao Kai completely opened up a chatterbox, and his words flowed without end. "Discrimination against the mutated infected has never been an exception, and it's not targeted at me personally. The stupidest thing for the weak is to resign themselves to adversity and fight alone. People like me can only hug each other for warmth. So this time, I'm doing this for myself, but also not for myself. I'm also doing this for those like me, because of a so-called mutation infection, and they're labeled and thrown into the laboratory at any time to be squeezed out of their blood, sweat, and tears. What **T logic? Isn't that so? The trade zone in Ban City is indeed **T. How many vagrants and mutated infected people are squeezed in every year?" Claire was so angry that she laughed. "You idiot, even if this is the case, with this cannon, the laboratory can be rebuilt, the researchers can be recruited, and the data can be backed up. The tens of thousands of vagrants and mutated infected people who are still alive over there will all be finished. Yes, that's right. I'm using this method to help them get rid of the impurity and pain of the mutation." Claire was stunned, and finally realized the extremely absurd point. even you are discriminating against yourself, I don't deny it. Chao Kai's tone was very calm. Some people are intoxicated by the ugly power and existence of the mutation, but we are not. Our church pursues the divine kingdom that is constructed together with the power of the soul. We want to use the torrent of holy light in the divine kingdom to cleanse the mutated superfluous and malignant tumors of matter. Cult? Whatever you think. The Soul Church? Claire's thoughts went one step deeper. The military had to screen and report the churches on the list of illegal religions, and constructing the divine kingdom of the soul together was the symbolic doctrine of the Soul Church. This was also one of the most active illegal churches recently. Chao Kai tacitly agreed. Hee hee. Claire only had the strength left to laugh bitterly. The military intelligence and the investigation department must be eating sh*t. You want such a lunatic who believes in a cult to be the commander of a ship? Also, this kind of technology that can bypass authorization and launch a city-destroying attack on its own, what the hell is going on? In this possibly meaningless conversation, at least 5 or more authorization gates were broken without any response. The corresponding feedback mechanism didn't seem to be working, and the ground didn't even respond. Of course, it could also be disconnected. On the bright side, maybe there would be countermeasures outside, but the inside of the ship didn't know. By the time they found out, they should have already been smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. As for the bad side, when Ban's city turned into a sea of fire, the ground would wake up, and then this side would be smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. They were all pieces, and there seemed to be no difference. As this thought flashed through his mind, Claire's body became more and more numb. He couldn't help but think that maybe he would directly die in the poisonous kiss of the octopus. He turned his gaze with difficulty. The thing that used to be cute, but now only felt terrifying, floated in the light and shadow of the tactical sand table. It happened to be near Ban's city, like a demon's seal. Stuck on it, it marked death. Chapter 1095. When Claire was in a daze, the alarm sounded. At the same time, the brightness of the entire command cabin plummeted and flashed with a dazzling red light. A mature man's magnetic voice sounded, Class A violation discovered. All privileges of the ship's crew will be immediately taken away. All crew members on board will immediately stop all activities and stand by. I repeat, finally found it. Claire's fingertips twitched. This was no longer the tone of the shipboard's artificial intelligence. It was obvious that a high-level intelligence had intervened. However, he did not heave a sigh of relief. Because at this moment, with the deprivation of authority, all the machines in the command cabin, which should have been locked down, were still operating. On the tactical sand table, the real-time status of the main engine displayed did not change. The corner of his eyes twitched. This method mastered by the Soul Church is no longer called technology, but damned magic. Is there a miracle to punish us? Claire did not wait for a miracle. 10 seconds later, the communication channel was replaced by a high-ranking general's request for negotiation. Although it was in a threatening tone, it was obvious that if there was another way, the other side would not use such an inefficient method at this critical moment. In fact, it was not inefficient, but there was no effect at all. The response from the other side was only Chao Kai's low murmur. His hands had stopped all operations. He just sat in the command seat and began to recite some inexplicable incantation or scripture. The firing process of the main cannon did not stop because of this. It had been completely dominated by that magic-like power and was advancing steadily. Claire had already seen the 30-second countdown. He really wanted to do something, but the numbness had already invaded the root of his tongue. He even lost the ability to speak. Even if his eyeballs were bulging out of their sockets, he could not do anything about what was happening in front of him. His emotions were essentially no different from the other side's nagging request for negotiation, and it would not have any effect. Under the effect of this weak struggle, the 30-second countdown quickly passed and returned to 0. A slight vibration was transmitted. Claire hoped that it was just an illusion under the high tension, but it was clearly the same feeling as when the main cannon was fired, it strictly matched with logic and reality. The main cannon was fired. The nuclear missile with a yield of 50,000 tons locked onto the inputted coordinates and ignited through the space-based launcher. Under the environment of light resistance, it could accelerate crazily in a very short time and rush into the atmosphere. Under the influence of Earth's gravity, its speed could eventually reach nearly Mach 20, which was already the level of an intercontinental ballistic missile. A distance of 400 kilometers could be reached in less than a minute. He didn't know what would happen to Sakura City, but the trade zone was definitely done for. "I'm really done for." Claire's eyes were fixed, and the octopus in the crystal ball was still floating in front of him. It was almost circling his face, as if it was celebrating or mocking him. Of course, the octopus simply ignored him. Claire really wanted to swallow and crush the thing in one bite. He did open his mouth, but even though his face was ferocious, his mouth was only a slit. There was nothing else, only saliva that had accumulated in the gravity-free environment and stirred in his mouth. Other than highlighting his wretched state, there was no other meaning to it. But for some reason, at this moment, the octopus dancing in the air suddenly trembled. It actually turned around and turned its head. The once adorable, gloomy, and cold eyes once again appeared in front of Claire. But this time, the place seemed to be a little deformed, twisting into a very funny arc shape. In fact, the round body of the octopus was also twisting, as if an invisible hand had penetrated the crystal ball and directly grabbed it, twisting it into all kinds of strange shapes. After half a second, even the crystal ball outside had been twisted. Only then did Claire know that the crystal ball was actually not a crystal ball, but a different texture. He was a little confused. At this time, the Enchanting in the command cabin was also distorted and deformed, as if it was being strangled by the throat. Claire opened his eyelids with difficulty, but he heard a muffled bang next to his ear. It sounded like it came from the position of the main cannon operating officer opposite him. He could no longer turn his head to look, and it was followed by almost the same sound. This time, it originated from the command seat above him. Almost at the same time, Claire's face was splashed with a warm mark. In fact, there were fragments of similar temperature and texture spreading out within his field of vision. It was like a bewitching flower of flesh had bloomed. It was close to 7:00 in the evening in Ban City. The sky had just darkened, and it was the peak of the evening. The temporary magnetic track passage above Beishan Lake opened. Even the trade district at the northern end of the lake could faintly see the blurry belt of light in the distant sky. It was currently covered by dark clouds, meandering and flowing. Move. Enle had just come down from the upper deck. She had been in a long-distance conference with Meng Chong on the Jadeite Light, as well as Jiang Yuanjun and the others in D City. They were discussing how to adjust the blood flame order after Luo Nan's high-key and powerful style of doing things. They talked about how the high-level conference, which had been brewing for many days, was about to begin. More new information needed to be formed, so they temporarily paused. They were prepared to make further plans after the conference. She clearly knew the truth, but Enle still wasn't quite used to Luo Nan's phenomenal performance of showing off his invincible might tens of thousands of kilometers away while sleeping on the yacht. She subconsciously headed toward the cabin Luo Nan was in. Enle habitually glanced at a corner after entering the main hall of the lower deck. Not surprisingly, she saw Snake Tongue hugging her knees. She was leaning there, her entire face buried in her knees. Snake Tongue didn't react to Enle's arrival at all. Ever since Snake Tongue became Luo Nan's experimental subject, her condition had never been good. Especially in the past 2 days, it seemed that she had been struck by some sort of ocular technique. Her condition had worsened. She was fine before Luo Nan's eyes, but most of the time, she had this dispirited and listless appearance. Enle gave up on communicating with Snake Tongue. She just came here out of habit. She didn't have a goal in mind. Luo Nan was resting in the bedroom, and he was splitting his attention to stir up trouble several thousand kilometers away. She didn't dare to disturb him. This was strange. Just as she thought that she couldn't be disturbed, her wristband vibrated. The sound wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally clear in the quiet room. Enlu frowned and looked. The name of the caller entered her eyes, causing her eyebrows to jump. A text message from the same source was sent over at this time. Enlu didn't look at it in detail. She directly connected. President He, you. This was how Enlu addressed He Yuan. The two originally didn't have much interaction, but Enlu had been collecting information from all walks of life on Luo Nan's orders recently. It was absolutely difficult to accomplish this by relying solely on the channels of the Blood Flame Order. It was unavoidably troublesome in order to guarantee the results. Though He Yuan was in a closed-door state, she still gave Enlu a lot of support. Over time, the two became familiar with each other. Enli's impression of He Yuan was that she was the type of person who did business according to the rules. She was also someone who understood propriety. She was never lacking in courtesy. But this time, the other side directly interrupted her speech. Mr. Luo is by your side? He's in the inner room. You guys move immediately. The nuclear strike is expected to arrive in 85 seconds. Huh. Immediately avoid danger. I've sent the location of the Civil Air Defense project closest to you. If you don't make it in time, enter the water nearby. At least a depth of 50 meters. Immediately. Enlu didn't doubt the authenticity of the information. Clearly, this was no joke. Moreover, as she and He Yuan were exchanging information, an alarm sounded in the air above the trade zone. It didn't matter if it was an air defense alarm or a nuclear strike alarm. In short, the elongated sharp wail truly bombarded her heart. Snake Tongue, who was in the corner, also raised her head to look. Enli's mind didn't have too much information at this moment. She was completely driven by instinct. She threw herself forward and opened the wooden sliding door. At the same time, she called out, "Mr." Enlu didn't finish her words because Luo Nan had already sat up in the inner room, hugging his quilt. It was unknown how long he had been up, but his hair was still a bit messy. Right now, his gaze was passing through the cabin's viewing window, casting into the noisy darkness outside. Enli's mind relaxed at first, but she soon became nervous again. "Mister, we must immediately." "Too late." "Huh. We're a step late." There are always these unexpected things. Luo Nan reached out his hand to rub his already somewhat messy hair. He looked a bit distressed. His mouth said it was too late, but his figure didn't budge. He still hugged his quilt and sat down. His sigh was neither too fast nor too slow. Snake Tongue also moved in and stood by Enli's side. The two glanced at each other. Although the emotions in their hearts weren't the same, they stopped talking at the same time. Yes, no matter how nervous they were, when they saw Luo Nan's appearance, they subconsciously, in principle, had to comply. Even if a nuclear bomb were to fall from the sky in the next moment and smash in front of their eyes, they still had to maintain this dignity. Only in this way could they demonstrate their respect and reverence for Luo Nan. Enlu and Snake Tongue didn't speak, but He Yuan's communications never ended. They were separated by several thousand kilometers, but she still transmitted a rare sense of nervousness and urgency over. "Your positions haven't changed, Sister Yuan, I know this matter. I'll take care of it." The air went silent for a moment before He Yuan responded. "Okay." The lingering sound reverberated within the yacht at Northern Mountain Lake. And in some secret military base several thousand kilometers away, He Yuan wore a loose robe. She stood barefoot on the ice-cold floor. Nutrient fluids slid down from her body and head. She cut a rare sorry figure. She had indeed forcefully interrupted the debugging experiment to warn Luo Nan. But Luo Nan's reaction made it hard for her to not be startled. On one side, a live broadcast was displayed in the projection area. Multiple angles of outer space and the atmosphere were stitched together to form a mosaic. There was a certain delay in the signal due to the several thousand kilometers distance and the mosaic of the image. So what she was seeing right now was the situation of 1 second, 2 seconds, or even 5 or 6 seconds ago. At this time, the various images had yet to completely lock onto the position of the falling nuclear warhead. She would only occasionally catch a glimpse of the dot of light. The dot of light shuttled back and forth within the complex misty environment. Dr. Pan, who had previously presided over the experiment, sighed with emotion. It's been a few years since I've seen this scene. Band City and the surrounding areas should have missile interception systems, right? Of course, they've mainly been used to shoot birds in recent years. When I was young. Yuan turned to look at him. What's wrong? The front-end satellite early warning system is abnormal. We've already missed the interception window. Is this a coincidence? It was too late to say anything now. The image showed that Band City's on-duty fighter had taken off, and the missile defense system had been turned on. But this was just the best they could do. Band City was already in chaos. The nuclear strike alarm was playing faithfully. Sound waves and text messages bombarded the city, paralyzing the evening rush hour in an instant. The true challenge is after the warhead hits the ground. Tian Bang walked in with large strides, dressed in a military uniform. His voice was clear and bright. I really didn't expect that there would still be a leading figure in this world right now. Do you need help? Ma'am? Yuan didn't respond, even though Tian Bang's words represented her stance in a certain sense. 85 seconds was very short, but it was also very long. She had already done quite a few things, but they all seemed to be meaningless. But in the end, she remembered Luo Nan's calm response. The mid-course interception failed. Actually, there was no mid-course interception at all. Tian Bang sighed as he watched. Space-based weapons were like this. Low resistance, high speed, short range. After breaking through the atmosphere, their speed exceeded Mach 20, bringing enormous pressure to the terminal anti-missile system. The reaction time was too limited. There's still 20 seconds, the time of destruction was already madly jumping toward the end in the time it took to speak. The first wave shouldn't be a problem. Tian Bang unconsciously sped up his speech to express his opinion. They had given nearly a minute and a half of warning time. The surrounding environment was still fine. An extraordinary should be able to survive no matter what. But what happened after this decisive method wasn't as simple as a post-disaster rescue. Yuan finally responded. She spoke of matters unrelated to the scene. The Amaterasu court has taken to the sky. It's heading toward Beishan Lake. Interception. My ass. Hey. Were they really not going to do anything? Tian Bang's mouth really couldn't keep up at this time. On the contrary, the military personnel in charge of monitoring and interception used highly reduced professional terms to form a storm that assaulted the eardrums through the live broadcast signal. Compared to the quick and calm terms used by the long-range personnel, the information link near Band City was perhaps more representative. Someone, possibly a pilot, had already begun to yell. At this time, the high-speed camera captured a few effective frames. The high heat reaction of the nuclear warhead was displayed as a dot of light falling from the sky in the dim image of the thermal imaging. And behind it was the despairing chain trajectory of an electromagnetic cannon that brushed past. The countdown had already entered 10 seconds. Perhaps it was 5. All means of interception had failed. The fate of the safe trade zone of Band City had been decided. Even Tian Bang felt the blood in his entire body accelerate. His pores opened up, and his scalp went slightly numb. He subconsciously opened his eyes wide and his pupils dilated, preparing to receive the terrifying cloud that was about to explode. Yuan's body suddenly trembled. This was the information that Tian Bang had received from the corner of his eye. But his brain didn't have the time to analyze it further, because at this time, the real scene image that had been pieced together split. It was hard to describe such a change. As a matter of fact, it was just a shadow that suddenly appeared on the real scene. It was so straight that it looked like someone had drawn it with a ruler. It was right in front of the bullet's light spot, and it had directly cut open the void that it was reflecting. Yes, this was the feeling. In the next instant, the dot of light of the warhead entered the shadow, and then, there was no then. The target has disappeared, someone said in the communication channel, and then there was meaningless noise. But Tian Bang saw that the real scene image was clearly fluctuating. It was as if the void was covered in clouds, trying to erase the traces left behind by the shadow. But the shadow was there, stretching across the horizon. There was a sense of disorderly three-dimensional disorder. It was as if one side of the void was curled up and the other side was curled up. It had lost its previous flat appearance, and instead formed a strange scene like a confrontation between two high cliffs. It was more like a festering wound that was difficult to heal in a short period of time. It was exposed in front of everyone's eyes. Chapter 1096. Right now, the professional technicians of the military who were dubbing the real scene images were at a loss for words. Their professional vocabulary was simply incapable of accurately and appropriately describing a phenomenon that exceeded the predetermined rules. Actually, it wasn't just them. Even Tian Bang was a bit stupefied for a time after his initial impression of the scene. He was faced with the results of the images and scans from the sky, from the ground, from the far end, and from the near end. In the end, he simply ridiculed, "Is this a dimensional slash? Let's call it a rift for the time being." The previous feeling of a deep gorge facing off against a high gorge wasn't wrong. It was like the smooth night sky had been sliced and torn apart by a tyrannical force to form a deep and serene rift. It was still extending, and it was unknown where its bottom led to. Tian Bang's line of sight fell into the hole of the rift. He was unable to pull it out for a while. What's inside? Where does it lead to? If I jump in, will I arrive at a new plane? He Yuan didn't respond. Her focus was clearly different. She used ground monitoring, low-altitude satellites, and other methods to confirm that Luo Nan was unharmed. Then she adjusted her view to a far-off wide-angle mode. It was as if she wanted to find out just how far the rift extended to in the end. Yes, the void rift had a direction. After it swallowed the nuclear warhead, it clearly extended from the west to the east. Its farthest end already far exceeded the current recording range of the real scene images. Even if she changed her view, she wouldn't be able to reach it in a short amount of time. Many people didn't care about where it would extend to. They didn't even understand the situation before their eyes. What was the point of expanding it in a hurry? Clearly, He Yuan wasn't that bored. Soon, Tian Bang understood. She wanted to establish a link between two important links. The rift above Northern Mountain Lake and the aircraft heading towards Northern Mountain Lake. It also seemed to be able to connect. It wasn't He Yuan's conceptual connection. Instead, it was the rift that continued to extend outwards. If he followed the approximate length of the rift, he might be able to touch it. The reason why Tian Bang wasn't sure was because the straight crack that left a deep impression like a ruler had become more and more unstable as it extended. It had long lost its sense of direction. It was like the cracks that extended like branches and vines when a shoddy wall was about to collapse. It was also like a bolt of lightning that exploded in the night sky. No one knew which direction it would bend in the next moment, and it could even disappear at any time. However, there were always bigger wounds that appeared in the tiny cracks at the ends, and they continued to push forward. Well, lightning was more accurate. The description was complicated, but in reality, the speed at which the void cracks were advancing was extremely fast. It wasn't any slower than the speed of a nuclear warhead. At the edges of the cracks, there were some that were moving, some that were expanding, and some that had already healed, revealing different forms. However, the front end that extended outwards had already exceeded the recording range of the high-speed cameras. Even if He Yuan had already intentionally chosen to view from afar, she could only barely keep up. There was no need to even mention the details. "I feel like it's going to collapse," Tian Bang murmured. "Huh?" Dr. Pan did not understand. "Don't you feel like this? It feels like the vault of heaven might collapse at any time." Sure enough, shoddy walls are more appropriate. This time, Dr. Pan understood half of what Luo Nan said, but it wasn't good for him to delve deeper. This was because the front end of the void crack that seemed like it could disappear at any time, but it was still advancing at a terrifying speed. It had already entered the same lens as the Amaterasu Court's flying device, which was moving at a similar speed. They're going to collide. Tian Bang whistled. Rather than saying this was a judgment, it was better to say that he was looking forward to a play. From the direction that the void crack was extending in, it could be seen that Mr. Luo Nan, the one who drew the crack, had a comprehensive understanding of the entire situation. At the very least, he seemed to have a clear understanding of who it was that had tossed a nuclear warhead down above his head. Then, were the two sides going to fight now? A fight between extraordinary levels? Now? Tian Bang suddenly found it hard to laugh when he thought deeper into the matter. The two sides came at each other at high speeds. They didn't give the spectators too much time to evaluate and guess. The distance between them rapidly shrunk as they drew closer to each other. Then, they brushed past each other. Tian Bang subconsciously narrowed his eyes the instant they brushed past each other. But nothing happened between the two, if not for the violent undulation of the flying device at the edge of the void crack. Tian Bang keenly sensed that the undulation of the flying device didn't seem to be caused by turbulence in the air. Instead, it was more like a picture on a warped sticker. Even the void that bore it was warping and fluctuating. Wow! He let out an emotional exclamation. The problem was that this kind of turbulence wasn't the main show. This was because the void crack continued to extend at an astonishing speed. If this continued, then the area it extended to, the Amaterasu Court? The Amaterasu Court was located in the open sea east of Ban City. The position where the sun rose represented the Amaterasu Order's transcendent and powerful control over the city of 10,000 gods. Honestly speaking, it wasn't that far away. At the very least, it was nothing compared to the speed at which the void crack was extending. Tian Bang, who was at the side, did not have much room to ponder. In just a few breaths' time, in the east, half of the sky that was already filled with greenish-black colors suddenly shone brightly. It was as if a sun had leaped out more than 10 hours in advance. Or was it a nuclear bomb that had crashed there? Tian Bang really thought so. But after a long time, he didn't see a mushroom cloud rise, nor did he hear any explosion. He couldn't help but feel a little confused. Was it a nuclear explosion? Tian Bang asked Yuan. The latter also shook her head. Although it was convenient, it would still miss a considerable amount of information. It was difficult to make a quick judgment. As they spoke, the strong light in the east dimmed. In this barely visible light, the spreading of the void crack finally seemed to be hindered. It was as if there was some kind of power in the strong light that was resisting it. Or more accurately, it was an invisible barrier that no one had discovered before. It was blocking in front of the void crack and was slowly appearing under the collision. In a sense, the void crack was spreading. But it was no longer like before, where it seemed to be tearing the sky apart. Instead, it began to spread. It was as if an invisible porcelain had been smashed in the void, and a spiderweb-like crack appeared. And in the inner layer of the crack, which was the depths of the strong light, there seemed to be vaguely a tree trunk, branches, and leaves, as well as the corresponding veins, extending outwards. This wasn't just a description, it was an actual image. There really was a giant tree that towered into the sky. Its canopy was like the clouds, but it was also colorful. It filled more than half of the lens, and it was far from being able to capture it. It felt as if its branches and leaves had even spread to the coastline of Ban City, and were moving towards a deeper area. But now, a small half of this scene had already been torn apart by the void crack. One could vaguely see thick branches and gorgeous colorful leaves breaking off and flying down. They came from nothingness, and returned to nothingness. No matter who it was, no matter how close or far, when they saw this scene, they were all momentarily speechless. And this scene didn't last for too long. As the strong light continued to weaken, the giant tree that towered into the sky also dimmed. Even the void crack that had caused everything to explode seemed to have been filled with too much light. Finally, its momentum dissipated, and it gradually closed up without a trace. Another few seconds passed. Everyone's line of sight was once again covered by the curtain of night that should have been present during nightfall. The sea and sky to the east of Band City were once again vast and boundless. And in every corner of the city, shrill sirens, noisy shouts, car horns, and other sounds became embellishments of the current situation. Oh my, why did you have to make such a mess? Mo La, who was in the aircraft, had just experienced a turbulence that wasn't caused by air turbulence. With her highly sensitive senses, she could even hear the many circuits of the aircraft, and the groans of the outer shell cracking and shaking. The various furnishings in the luxurious cabin that she was in were also a mess. Most importantly, she was already all alone. The two people who were originally riding with her were forced to return to take charge of the defense of the God Court the moment the void crack appeared. They didn't even greet them. This was really rude. That's right. An unexpected result. Mo La laughed in self-mockery. She raised her wine cup. The cup contained a bit of wine that she had saved from a spilled wine bottle. She didn't mind. She let the translucent wine swirl around the rim of the cup and between her lips and teeth, just like the undulating void. Compared to this, the wine was really dull and tasteless. She's younger than me by 10 years. Is it because of her talent, or is there some other reason? In any case, it looks delicious. Her teeth streaked across the wine, and she rubbed her lips that were painted light purple. Blood slowly came out. She didn't feel any pain. Instead, her smile became all the more bewitching. But in the next second, she confirmed the direction of the aircraft. She rolled her eyes, got up, and walked into the cockpit with large strides. Are you trying to bring me to my death? It's troublesome, the wrong angle. How can I go to the Amaterasu God Court, Xia City? Thank you. Speaking of which, do you have enough fuel? Registration for the intercity aircraft? Visiting relatives. My blood sister is there. Yeah, there's a cheap master there too. The aircraft brushed shoulders with the low-flying fighter jet. Going to Xia City required flying over the skies of Ban City. There were still some rational pilots who took a detour around Beishan Lake. The problem was that in the eyes of some people, this so-called detour was meaningless. Mo La could clearly feel that when the aircraft passed through the thick clouds above Ban City, the cracks in the void and the powerful light couldn't completely tear through them. Her body and soul structure clearly had a sort of marvelous penetrative feeling. Mo La maintained her smile, and this feeling quickly disappeared without a trace. She didn't say anything else. Of course, it was also possible that he had entered a level that she still couldn't reach. She didn't bother about this. She just drained the remaining wine in her cup in one gulp. Very gentlemanly. Delicious boy. He Yuan and Tian Bang were thousands of kilometers away, especially on the level of extraordinaries. It was really hard for them to grasp the details of the situation over at Ban City. But no matter what was said, the most difficult and complicated period should have passed as the aircraft passed through the skies above Ban City and headed in the direction of the old continent. There was no follow-up from the direction of the Amaterasu God Court or the direction of Beishan Lake. Both sides entered a seemingly tacit state of silence. It was frail, but it gave one a narcotic sense of security. He Yuan's eyebrows relaxed a bit, but she cut a bit of a sorry figure at the moment. She said, I'll go take care of it. Tian Bang said without thinking, I don't mind. He Yuan didn't respond at all. She just left. Tian Bang shrugged his shoulders, his gaze sweeping over the live image. There was no longer any meaning in the situation over at Ban City. The few people who stood at the very top of the world were taking revenge on one side while stealing from the main camp. Their thoughts were clear, and the results were vague yet barely acceptable. They wouldn't be able to find the trigger to erupt in a short amount of time, probably. After all, even if the changes on the level of extraordinaries were laid out before their eyes, they wouldn't be able to understand them. In comparison, he was a bit more interested in tracing back to the source. The problem was that his position in the army system was relatively high. He didn't have much of a card to play on the side of the independent Air Force. He had only heard a bit about what had happened on the magic cloud platform above his head. He didn't know the specifics at all. He just faced Yuan's back and shouted, "Jade Dragon. If there's any definite news, send it over. Everyone can help together." Yuan still didn't pay attention to him. But at this time, Luo Nan's voice rang out from the other side of the communication. "Sister Yuan. Help me out." Yuan's feet stopped. "Please speak, Mr. Luo. It's the one in near-Earth orbit. You guys were talking about something called the Jade Dragon just now. I'm quite interested in that side. There might be something left behind. I want to take it and study it." Yuan had already responded without waiting for Luo Nan to finish speaking. "I'll think of a way. Mr. Luo, are you doing well on your side?" It's nothing. Sometimes I just feel that those two from the Amaterasu order are a bit too tactful. That's why I say, broadening your horizons and being more knowledgeable are still beneficial, right?" Tian Bang clenched his fists behind Yuan's back, but in the end, he could only roll his eyes and prick his ears to listen to the conversation between the two. Speaking of which, he could understand what it meant to be tactful, but how could he understand broadening his horizons and being more knowledgeable? He turned his head to look at the space that was already beginning to close up. He seemed to be lost in thought. In Tian Bang's position, he had to consider a bit more. But for a frontline soldier, all he needed to do was carry out orders. Before the situation in Ban City was completely clear, the Jade Dragon had already left the inner defensive perimeter in Earth's near-Earth orbit. Its privileges had already been completely sealed, and it practically sunk into darkness. Only the solar panels were still reflecting a bit of the faint light from the distant edge of the Earth. Soon, a landing ship docked with the platform. Dozens of aerospace army officers, who could be summoned in a short amount of time, forcefully boarded the ship. Contrary to expectations, they advanced like a hot knife through butter. Everyone on the Jade Dragon appeared to be in a stupefied state. Whether they were soldiers or researchers, they were all extremely cooperative. There was no challenge at all. The commandos charged all the way to the command cabin. They broke the door open and entered. All they saw was the tactical sand table projection that was still flickering under the support of an unknown source of energy. Under the dim light, large amounts of solid, liquid, and other mixed fragments of human tissue floated and scattered. There were 8 personnel, led by Claire, the adjutant of the Jade Dragon. They were restrained by buckles in their respective positions. Some were unconscious, like Claire. Some had already died without a sound. The preliminary judgment was that they had ingested an excessive amount of anesthetic. The commando leader discussed with the sergeant in charge of technical identification and decided to first report to their superiors. At the same time, they began to take photos and videos of the messy command cabin. They also searched for the corresponding surveillance footage to preserve first-hand information. After receiving new orders, they began to further deal with the aftermath. While his subordinates were busy, the commando leader suppressed his disgust and entered the core of the command cabin. It was currently also the area with the densest concentration of all kinds of flesh and floating debris. It didn't take long for him to find the object specified in the new order. It was a crystal ball that looked a bit distorted. Because it was distorted, it gave off a very strange and cheap feeling. Inside it was a lump of rotten flesh that was almost unrecognizable. This lump of rotten flesh was still twitching, as if it was maintaining a rather tenacious vitality. The commando leader even saw that there was an area under the mangled flesh and nerves. It looked like an eyeball that was basically intact, projecting a cold and demonic line of sight. The commando leader actually felt a little dizzy when he looked into the eye. He subconsciously took a step back. His movements were too large and attracted the attention of his subordinates. Many people raised their guns, including the commando leader himself. But at this moment, he saw that the demonic eye seemed to have been slashed by an invisible blade. Blood splattered, but it was blocked by the inner wall of the distorted crystal ball, so the sputtering effect was limited. But it was obvious that this was a heavy blow. Not to mention the eye that had almost been cut in half, even the twitching flesh and nerves around it had weakened. The question was, where did this blow come from? What was going on? The commando leader didn't dare to move for a moment. With his rich combat experience, he subconsciously felt that there was still some kind of tension in the command cabin that had been splattered with flesh and blood. There was an invisible force that was highly dangerous to armed personnel like them. He turned on the communicator and contacted the command center again because this was clearly different from the description in the order. A few seconds later, he received a more accurate answer. "That's right." "All right, whatever you say." The commando leader put in a lot of thought for this temporary order. It wasn't easy for him to find a sealed metal container and store the distorted crystal ball. Strangely enough, the entire process didn't have any twists and turns. After storing it inside, he could sense a rhythmic pulse in the container through the sensor on the exoskeleton armor. There was even a kind of ice-cold touch that made him shiver involuntarily. Illusion, illusion. The commando leader didn't delay any further. He personally escorted the crystal ball and the metal container that contained the rotten flesh out of the Jade Dragon. He then quickly switched to another transport ship. After traveling in orbit for a period of time, the ship went against the direction of Earth's rotation and entered the atmosphere. This kind of transportation method was similar to a rail elevator. In theory, it could deliver the express mail to a designated person in any corner of the world within an hour. 20 minutes later, the transport ship penetrated the thick clouds and arrived at a certain sea in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was obvious that the weather conditions in this sea were terrible. Not only were the clouds thick, but there were also dense lightning flashing deep in the clouds. And in this vast sea where the storm raged, there was a luxurious cruise ship bobbing up and down in the wind and waves. Strangely enough, there was a thick fog surrounding it. If it weren't for the clear coordinates and the powerful lighting equipment on the cruise ship, the commando leader would have had to spend a lot of effort to discover this small metal box. How did I end up here? Chapter 1097. Reality did not give him a clear answer. Since there was no platform on the luxurious cruise ship that could take off and land an interstellar transport ship, the assault team leader had to exit the cabin and use the short-range flight function of the exoskeleton armor to land directly on the cruise ship, cross the last kilometer, and deliver the goods to his doorstep. Without a doubt, someone who could use military resources like this and use such resources had to be someone with great power. If it was just to satisfy some people's curiosity, it would be fine, and it could even be called fooling around. But when it came to the mastermind behind this matter, or even to destroy physical evidence, it should not be. As a qualified professional soldier, the assault team leader should not be so crazy in his mind, but in the current situation, he could not help but think too much. When he opened the hatch, he subconsciously checked the black box inside the armor. Only then did he jump and use the short-range jet engine on the exoskeleton armor to pierce through the layers of clouds and quickly approach the luxurious yacht. Almost the moment he exited the cabin and flew down, the high-precision radar had already reported many reaction signals that could pose a threat to him. The assault team leader almost crashed back into the transport ship. It was also at this time that his superior gave him a timely comfort and warning. "You don't have to worry about anything. Deliver the goods safely to the designated person, and you will be given credit." "This is more like an illegal operation," the assault team leader cursed in his heart, but he still braced himself and moved toward the luxurious yacht under the blinking warning lights. When he was only about 200 meters away from the yacht, a voice finally sounded from the previously designated temporary communication channel. "Please come to this position." The assault team leader pursed his lips and swore to be a mute tool. He listened to the arrangements on the other side, drew a small arc around the hull, and arrived above the precise coordinates given by the other party. His vision passed through the thick fog. He felt that this should be a pool deck, a place where the rich played and indulged themselves. However, the visibility here was terrible. It was as if the pool that originally stored water had become a place where clouds and fog had accumulated. Since it was already night time, ordinary people could really get lost here. Through the multidimensional imaging equipment, he could confirm that there were 4 people on the deck, 2 men and 2 women. This number made him feel a little more at ease. The suspicion of a private transaction was lessened a little. Temporarily dispelling the distracting thoughts in his mind, the assault captain adjusted the exoskeleton armor to hover mode and descended. Even so, the tail flames still inevitably scorched a part of the wooden deck. Of course, there was no one here to stop him and ask for compensation. There was only a thin and capable man who directly walked forward without the slightest fear of the 3-meter-tall steel war equipment, indicating that the handover was complete. The multidimensional imaging showed that the other 3 people were still in their original positions, hidden in the thick clouds. If that was all there was to it, there was indeed a strong sense of mystery. But a woman's lively voice suddenly shattered the atmosphere. "That's it? No wonder you're secretary he. What a great honor. Little Zhang, you are making things too complicated. This has nothing to do with face. If you're hit in the head by a nuclear bomb from the military and you're not hurt at all you have to do is make a phone call and say, 'Do me a favor and we'll call it even.' Do you believe that the people in the military will immediately clean themselves up and let you do whatever you want to them? Disgusting." Amidst the confusing and informative conversation, the assault captain handed over the sealed metal box. The thin man in charge of receiving it nodded at him. "You can go now." With that, he turned around but did not face anyone on the deck. Instead, he walked quickly to where the swimming pool was. The assault captain had a stomach full of questions, but at this moment, his superior kept urging him. "Hurry up and go. Don't delay." He had no choice but to obey. He adjusted the hover mode and increased the power of the jet engine, causing the charred part of the deck below to really burn. Because of the high heat that was emitted, a part of the clouds was blown away, causing the thick fog above the swimming pool to disperse a little, revealing a vague figure above. It was not one of the 4 people that had been detected earlier. That person was also hovering in the air, at the same height as him. However, he was not wrapped in the exoskeleton armor, nor did he have any engine to support him. He just quietly hovered like a cold ghost. The assault captain shuddered. When he wanted to take a closer look, the exoskeleton armor had already sped up, and soon, he was more than 100 meters in the air. When he looked down again, the fog had covered the deck again, and he could not see anything. As for multidimensional imaging, enhanced scanning, and so on. Please, he was not an idiot. The assault captain was not stupid. He strictly followed the instructions and directly deleted the temporary channel, putting an end to this matter. However, it was difficult to control a person's heart. He could not hide his curiosity, and while the distance between them increased, he subconsciously lowered his head to take another look. Speaking of which, it was strange. He was already hundreds of meters in the air, but the farther he got, the clearer the deck became. He could vaguely see the 5 figures, especially the one floating above the swimming pool. It was that person. He seemed to have already obtained the metal box with the strange crystal ball and rotten meat sealed inside. Then, he raised his head and looked over. Looked over? The assault captain's heart skipped a beat. It was also at this moment that a powerful binding force suddenly acted on his body. The pressure on his body and the sharp alarm in the cabin formed a chemical reaction, stimulating the secretion of a large amount of adrenaline, and his entire body suddenly tensed up. Silencing the witness. He cried out in his mind. He practically increased the output power of the engine by instinct, but the power also rose along with it. It was to the extent that the value on the altimeter didn't increase. Instead, it flew down. As for the assault captain, he felt as if he had gone from a gravity-free environment to 10 GS in an instant. It was to the extent that his vision went black, and his consciousness went blank for a second or two, maybe even longer. Bang. By the time he came back to his senses, the exoskeleton armor had already returned to the deck. Its landing posture was actually quite appropriate. Aside from the empty deck, there was also the pilot, who was spinning around. At this time, another message came from his superior. "Danilo, there's been a change of orders. You stay there and assist in completing the new mission. You also need to eliminate the possible infection. I wish you good luck. What? What the hell are you doing? Zhang Yingying shouted towards the sky above the swimming pool. She had heard the news of the nuclear bomb descending on Osaka City. She was unable to contact the real person, so she ran over to look for her avatar. She never expected to see such a scene. She was the one with the least amount of information in this group. She was more and more unable to understand what was going on. Get back the evidence. Luo Nan said some nonsense. Isn't that place closer to Osaka City? The conditions here are better. It's more suitable for collecting and organizing materials. As Luo Nan spoke, the more agile control lines of the magnetite mica had already pierced through the twisted crystal ball and rotten flesh countless times. It used its unique perspective to observe. Zhang Yingying was completely unaware of this. She just asked, "What the hell is this? A mutant?" It should be, and it's highly contagious. At the very least, the one who sent it over has already been infected. Luo Nan's hands were filled with dense water vapor. He had already created layers of isolation. So stay away. Hey, what about Meng Chong? There's no problem at the moment. The possibility of ability users suffering from mutant infection has always been very small. However, the space-based platform needs to be screened. I just talked to Sister Yuan. While speaking, Luo Nan simply sent the source of infection into the spatial fault to eliminate hidden dangers. At this time, Black Lion, who had been drooling to join in on the fun, called out from the side of the swimming pool, "Brother Luo Nan, that meeting has started." They were indeed late due to this incident in the middle of the meeting. Perhaps they had already missed one or two items on the agenda. Since we're late, it doesn't matter if we delay a bit longer. There's nothing interesting ahead anyway. Luo Nan had a completely indifferent attitude. He waited for Meng Chong to bring the highly suspected infected courier out of the cabin. Meng Chong began to explain and settle them down, and then Luo Nan's figure disappeared into the mist once more. Well, this guy really wasn't willing to cooperate. That's right. Anyone who just had a nuclear warhead smashed into their head, whether it exploded or not, would not let a formalistic meeting take up their time. Black Lion shrugged. He didn't care. The reason why he spoke was because he was entrusted by someone to pass the message. But what could he do if Luo Nan didn't cooperate? Luo Nan had the qualifications to be willful. Frankly speaking, Black Lion still hadn't completely digested the events that happened over at Ban City. He didn't have the mood to participate in the meeting and watch Abner play all kinds of political maneuvers. Even if the meeting was held for 10 days and 10 nights, could he analyze how Luo Nan did it? Could he finally figure out how this underage child grasped the secrets of inconceivable power in such a short amount of time? He couldn't. If he couldn't, then what the hell was he doing? The human heart always had its ups and downs. For a time, Black Lion's interest was dull. He waved goodbye to Luo Nan and prepared to find a secluded place to sort out his thoughts and emotions. He didn't walk far before someone called him again. Black Lion looked at the contact and his lips curled. It was Old L's call. This old thing, who had been eliminated in a dishonorable manner, took the initiative to get involved again after a few hours of psychological and physiological adjustment. Black Lion didn't know if this old thing had a deeper plan or if he was simply intrigued by the major incident that nearly became the headline news of the entire 90s. Perhaps it was the latter. Black Lion could easily tell that Old L's was actually using a simulated human voice. Clearly, he had yet to completely recover from the important property loss of a few hours ago. Perhaps he was lying in the health pod right now, consuming some of the extremely limited energy in that old and broken body. You're next to that kid? I just left. Have you figured out the twists and turns? Heh, are you teaching me how to do things? It's just a conventional prejudgment. If you didn't do it, then it probably proves that the kid has caused an extremely direct impact on you, to the point where your curiosity to get to the bottom of things has been suppressed. Congratulations on still having the strength to say such a long sentence. Sure enough, once you've been eliminated, all sorts of calmness and reason will return. From this point of view, perhaps that luxurious health pod is the best place for you to return to. The Black Lion sent a warning and a curse before ending the communication. This wasn't considered an act of anger because he really didn't have anything to say or communicate with. He had been by Luo Nan's side when the incident occurred, or at least he had been by one of Luo Nan's sides. He had high-level privileges as an extraordinary, helping him understand the general outline of the entire incident as well as some key links. However, the truly crucial point was still like the thick clouds and mist surrounding the Jade Light ship. The phenomenon was there, but its roots were unfathomable. Why? Why was Luo Nan able to predict the future? Why was he able to quickly lock onto the mastermind behind the scenes? What was the reasoning behind Luo Nan's ability to tear through the void? What was the origin of such a handy ability? Actually, there was a barely acceptable answer to every question. Luo Nan was able to survey the entire world and expose a group of people harboring evil intentions in real time. Why was he unable to discover the plot in near-Earth orbit that was only 400 kilometers away? Luo Nan was able to send a group of billionaires and experts in the field of distortion research to the roof of the world. What was the big deal with dealing with a falling nuclear warhead with such a method of warping space and time? As for the origin of the ability and method, everything would be fine if he pushed it to the new plane. However, the crux of the problem was never whether or not a reason could be found. Instead, it was the reason, the ability, and where the true boundaries of it were. Was this a momentary stroke of luck, or was it an inevitable outcome? Would this always be the result when they faced similar incidents in the future? This was a very serious judgment question. It determined whether they were facing a person with powerful abilities or an omniscient and omnipotent God. Of course, the possibility of the latter was far, far too low. But looking at it from a realistic point of view, it would be safer to take the attitude one would have when facing a god before the boundaries were explored. Black Lion's mind stirred slightly at this time. He suddenly understood a bit. The mastermind behind the scenes who created such a major incident might have some intentions. Where in the world were the boundaries of Luo Nan's ability? It wasn't just the mastermind behind the scenes. Perhaps all the magistrates of the world, and even all the curious people, would do everything in their power to probe. Old elves would go all out to communicate with Luo Nan. Frankly speaking, he had the same thoughts. As for Luo Nan, what would he do? Black Lion tried to put himself in Luo Nan's shoes, but he was unable to do so in the end. This had nothing to do with Luo Nan's personality. Instead, when Black Lion did some deep thinking, he discovered that he was already unable to imagine a fellow like Luo Nan. What he saw and felt, and what sort of thinking was formed on the basis of these feelings and experiences. Perhaps he wasn't a god, but he certainly wasn't a human. This was probably the case. Chapter 1098. Luo Nan's consciousness followed the basic structure of the magnetic optical mica to wander about in the vast and marvelous new world. The so-called new world was just the world he was used to seeing in the past. It was a brand new creation under the unique perception of the magnetic optical mica. Luo Nan shouldn't rashly describe the current situation. It had already lost its usual smoothness and tone. It had turned into countless bubble phantoms that ran along the edge of the gravitational vortex of the sun and the earth. They were warped and impacted by countless other forces. It could even be further refined into a grid of various frequency bands that interweaved with each other in various forms. Luo Nan didn't have the intention to investigate in detail. This was because everything he saw at this stage was the product of forcefully twisting old experiences and new horizons. He really lacked the corresponding analytical tools to make a meaningful interpretation of this new form of space, time, life, and matter. This point wasn't written in the theory of the school of fantasy. There was no clear answer in the existing database. It wasn't possible for him to obtain or extract relevant knowledge in a short period of time. He needed to adapt bit by bit and harmonize with his past experiences. Therefore, he did his best to analyze and ponder with his past experiences in order to realize an orderly connection. Even so, he still needed to receive and process a rather extensive amount of information. Reactions from all sides were basically fed back to him. Some were directly sent messages and phone calls by acquaintances. Some were collected by Luo Nan on his own initiative. This included the global scope and even the near-Earth orbit region that he had just barely reached. Everyone who knew him and had a conceptual understanding of the previous events radiated clear and complex signals. How to put it? Homogenization was quite serious. If one were to roughly describe it with emotions, they would basically be astonishment, fear, doubt, bewilderment. Nothing more than that. They were probably all subdued by Luo Nan's nearly inconceivable operation. Luo Nan had continued and pushed the jadeite light auction to this day. Luo Nan was a deterrent to this world. The nuclear bomb on the material plane hadn't exploded, but the mental plane seemed to have been plowed flat quite a few layers. It could be interpreted in this way for the time being. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan was a bit proud of himself. Thanks to the timely replacement of the sensing medium by the magneto-optical mica jellyfish and the expansion of the sensing range, although the information from more dimensions was much more blurry, the limits of his mental senses had expanded from the Earth's biosphere, which was rich in water vapor, to the low Earth orbit, where the air was extremely thin. Because of this, Luo Nan's warning time was longer than most people estimated. He even interfered with the situation at the end of the development. Unfortunately, limited by the fuzziness of the new sensing mode and the lack of analysis ability, the precision, accuracy, and speed of his analysis and translation were questionable. In the end, he was still one step slower, and the main cannon of the space-based platform was launched successfully. But this also left room for him to perform even more shocking moves. Luo Nan still relied on the magneto-optical mica for his second stage of operation. At the very least, he relied on it partially. At this moment, in the magnificent palace in his spiritual world, two figures became clearer and clearer. One was the magneto-optical mica, the other was the shadow cockroach. In comparison, the latter was even more agile, as if it would break through the restraints of the palace's space in the next moment and dive into the real world. Of course, it was only as if. Again, without the foundation of the material plane, no matter how clear the structure and image was, it was impossible to restore it to the level of reality. In particular, the shadow cockroach was an extremely special existence. From his experience at the relay station, Luo Nan knew that it was very difficult for this thing to survive on the material plane of the local spacetime. It simply did not belong to this spacetime. There was a saying that the shadow cockroach was not an independent life form. It was the tentacle of some terrifying demon in the spacetime of the outer realm. Only the special ability of the magneto-optical mica could open the realm gate. Only then could Luo Nan take it by surprise and throw it into the local spacetime, achieving an instantaneous spacetime cleave. At the present stage, the magneto-optical mica that Luo Nan had cultivated was merely a larva. Sorry, Luo Nan had yet to research an operational plan to open the realm gate. When all was said and done, the attack that tore through the void was just a reference to Luo Nan's past memories and the structure that appeared in the palace of the mind. Luo Nan fused his own understanding of the structure of spacetime into a successful imitation. That was all. It was because of this that the very first crack in the void was perfectly straight. It was filled with traces of artificiality. But the more time passed, the more Luo Nan was able to experience the miraculous power of the shadow cockroach crossing worlds to come like a butcher dismembering an ox. The shadow cockroach followed the warped lines of spacetime and easily tore through the relay station's spacetime barrier and the bloodshed field. Therefore, the more the crack in the void extended, the more it had a bit of the charm of the shadow cockroach tearing through space at the relay station. Of course, this was all he could do for now. He still needed to carefully organize his insights in the future. Yes, this was all. In the end, Luo Nan was not muddle-headed. At the present stage, more and more people radiated emotions of shock, admiration, and fear with the passage of time. They revolved around this matter, endlessly magnifying the Luo Nan chi in their hearts. They stirred up more and more power, and in turn, they were used by Luo Nan. The resources he could control grew larger and larger, forming an astonishing virtuous cycle that continued to improve. It was like an enormous engine erected on the mental plane, endlessly absorbing fuel and releasing surging power. But such power was risky in the end. If Luo Nan hadn't realized the differential coupling of the body gear and the god gear early on and formed the boundless soul cloak in the altar's spiderweb to contain excess energy as a buffer structure, he would certainly have exploded by now. Luo Nan didn't explode, safely passing through this juncture. Recently, he had made deep contact with the Abyssal Sun Wheel and the Heavenly Abyss Empire civilization. He had even borrowed the help of the Innerverse simulator to enter the dream. He had gained a thorough understanding of a series of related theories. With these theories as a guide, he finally possessed enough power to control and overturn the universe. But was he really omnipotent? Especially after his experience at the relay station, his horizons had broadened to the era of the universe, to the level of the Heavenly Abyss civilization. He couldn't help but think, this kind of power could run amok on Earth for a time. But what about in a different environment? In the light concealment galaxy, not to mention his imitation, he had personally experienced the power of a true magnetite mica, the power of a great sovereign. Needless to say, in this vile and poisonous environment, the power of the mental side wouldn't die fast enough. Even if this was a special case, the wider interstellar civilization society didn't seem to be stable. It was just like Liang Lu's notes on the lamination interference technique. It reflected a cautious mentality. Luo Nan wasn't the kind of neurotic person who would be crushed by some illusory, far-sighted considerations. But in the end, he was still used to searching for a more effective frame of reference, to give himself a relatively fair judgment. The Heavenly Abyss civilization possessed a complete, precise, and clearly divided level system as a blueprint. Did he really want to degenerate to the point of living on Earth, where the system of supernatural powers was still relatively chaotic? Did he want to indulge in foolish, arrogant dreams? From Luo Nan's perspective, this wasn't a problem at all. He didn't need to waste energy on this. Instead, there was a thought. It was like an island during the continental movement. It gradually rose from the depths of the sea of chaos. Under the arching and polishing of this thought, it emerged more and more clearly: the environment molds people. The environment changes people. Any sort of ability would inevitably be evaluated and influenced by the larger environment. Then, when would one's own ability not be impacted by the external environment and become a body of its own? Probably to be like great monarch Chang Yishuan. She had slain gods and subdued demons in her life. After her death, she could transform into an undying plane to resist evil and poison. She could light up the star system and become a shelter for civilization. This was the only way. To put it bluntly, it was the ability to construct a world. A similar realm description had already appeared in the Innerverse simulator. But it was still too far away. Luo Nan wasn't prepared to think too much about this. He returned to a more direct goal: don't even talk about a real world with its own rules. He hadn't even broken ground on a deceptive counterfeit. Mr. Luo, who could overturn heaven and earth, why don't you pinch a new plane to see? Luo Nan smirked. His last bit of complacency was wiped away cleanly. Then again, pondering and spurring himself on was admittedly good. But the great enemy that had always been hiding behind the scenes, the great enemy that still hadn't made his appearance. Should he also be pondered? The current situation felt a bit off course. Off course. Off course. The blood demon really enjoyed the realistic feeling of the chairs in the virtual venue, and he was quite cooperative. He didn't deliberately see through anything because of the extraordinary perception of an extraordinary. He was a human. He wanted to deceive himself and others. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes a few times after Luo Nan made that prediction, which made people unable to laugh, and it came true in one fell swoop. But Luo Nan's side was really hard to talk about, so he simply entered the venue early to watch the excitement. Right now, it really was quite lively. This was the Global Extraordinary Summit Conference that started with the death of the veteran extraordinary Gong Qi. It was a hot topic because of the new plane. It attracted the attention of practically all extraordinaries and people in power from all walks of life. It had been prepared and brewed for many days. It had gone through many twists and turns. Once it was convened, people from all walks of life spoke enthusiastically. The problem was that because of the actions of Luo Nan, the topic of discussion had already been distorted into something that wasn't the same. The original topic, the determination of old Mr. Gong Qi's death, was covered in a few words. Fine, Luo Nan didn't even have to wait. He blew himself up, but what could you do to him? The conference did say that blood relatives were allowed to take revenge, but was this because Gong Qi's bloodline hadn't fallen thoroughly enough? As for the topic of the new plane that was supposed to be the most explosive, the main character didn't come at all. Abner, who was presiding over the conference, spoke a few repetitive words. He chewed on his words, changed his words, and repeated them dozens of times. There was no real meaning to his words. Actually, if someone dared to break the topic, it wasn't like they couldn't discuss it. However, the scene of the world's roll call and the one-way trip to the roof of the world were still vivid in their minds. The chaotic yet incomparably sincere auction was still going on, constantly setting new highs. Not to mention, there was an attempted nuclear explosion over at Ban City. The explosive news diluted the explosive topic. It was like using a nuclear explosion to suppress nuclear radiation. It sounded absurd and ridiculous, but it also possessed a high degree of rationality. Therefore, the rare summit conference quickly turned into an analysis meeting of the attempted nuclear explosion. This was an unforeseen event that absolutely wasn't on the agenda. It also showed that Abner had completely lost control of this conference. Yes, from Blood Demon's point of view, Abner had never spent any effort to control anything. This veteran extraordinary, who had already mutated into a standard political animal, seemed to want this discussion to continue. He wanted to help Blood Demon gather some information and ideas so that he could sort out a train of thought amidst this chaotic mess. Therefore, the discussion in the virtual conference hall continued on without the main topic. It caused a summit conference that involved key events and scarce resources. It should have been serious and tense. It should have even been filled with the light of blades and shadows of blood. However, it turned into a tea party. At most, it was an academic seminar. Blood Demon confirmed the time. The hour hand was nearing 11 o'clock. The conference had already gone on for nearly an hour. The discussion regarding Luo Nan was still in the ascendant stage. It seemed that it wouldn't hurt to talk for an entire night. Several core big shots, including Abner, had tacitly agreed. Clearly, they weren't just interested. They were also waiting. They were waiting for the arrival of the fellow who could make this conference truly meaningful. While he was thinking, colorful light gathered to the side. A new projection cut in. This projection was guided by the conference system. It directly entered the innermost round table sequence. Blood Demon's mind was roused. He's here. Within the virtual conference hall, the participants all received the relevant information, whether it was through watching or through the system's prompts. Their thoughts converged in the first instant. That's right. It was Luo Nan. This young man, who easily pulled apart the age gap between him and everyone else in the conference hall, appeared in his position. His position reflected the details. Luo Nan's position was on the opposite side of Abner, the convener and host of the conference. The two's positions were slightly staggered to avoid being directly opposite each other. Luo Nan gave the opposite position to the two members of the Amaterasu order. It was worth mentioning that this position adjustment was made urgently after the nuclear bomb incident. This wasn't just a recognition of Luo Nan's position, it was also Abner's attitude. Only the heavens knew whether or not Luo Nan would be able to accept this little detail. From the looks of it, this young man's focus was clearly not here. It was no wonder that True God and the Pope didn't appear at this conference. The designed opposition and shield were already meaningless. But it was the absence of these two that made people have no choice but to consider whether or not a victor had already been decided behind the anticlimax conflict. It didn't matter if it was in a symbolic or practical sense. Everyone in the conference hall had their own distracting thoughts. Luo Nan, who had entered the virtual conference hall, was also adapting to this new environment. At the very least, he had to convince himself that this scientific illusion was real. He looked around and immediately saw the blood demon beside him. He smiled at him, and the latter raised his eyebrows in response. "What's the topic?" Luo Nan asked casually. He didn't expect the clamor in the entire virtual conference hall to quickly recede in these short 2 or 3 seconds until there was nothing left. Only his own voice reverberated in the room. Chapter 1099. Luo Nan did not expect that the atmosphere within the conference hall would be this sensitive, that he would become the focus of everyone in an instant. Then again, this was to be expected. After all, he was the focus and core of all the recent problems of the world. Right now, he was quite dissatisfied with his current state. Luckily, he had acted as the host of the auction not too long ago, so he had retained some of his habits. He raised his hand and used a familiar tone to greet everyone. "Sorry, something came up, I'm late." The true host, Abner, displayed his abilities at this time. He revealed a smile and chose a not-so-neutral form of address. "Everyone knows the reason why Professor Luo is late. It really is an unstoppable force." "Who said that? Didn't we just endure it?" A fellow spoke in a roundabout manner. It seemed like he was targeting Abner, but it was also a bit provocative to Luo Nan. In short, it was a tone that made both sides unhappy. "Xiao Sato is an old lecherous man." Blood Demon promptly reminded him from the side. "He holds the title of Deputy Secretary General of Headquarters, but he actually walks closer to the capital side." "I know. He's always been neither lecherous nor masculine." Luo Nan knew that this fashionista had never gotten along with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't play a good role in the appraisal meeting last time either. Luo Nan only cared about recognizing people. He didn't care about anything else. Abner acted as if he didn't hear anything. He signaled for the Secretary General behind him to step forward. "Roman?" Romanus didn't speak. He didn't have any expression. He just sent Luo Nan a draft of the meeting minutes he had done earlier through the conference system. Luo Nan raised his head to look at this extraordinary whose name sounded a bit similar to his own. He had heard of Romanus before. He was one of the new extraordinaries in recent years. He was said to be an astute and low-key fellow. Now it seemed that he really was low-key. "You guys chat. I'm going to take a look." These weren't polite words. Luo Nan still needed to adapt to his new environment. He definitely wouldn't have received this treatment before tonight. He would have been greeted with questions the moment he entered the conference hall. Now, he took the initiative to withdraw from the focal point. It was as if he was giving face. What Luo Nan needed to do right now was indeed related to face. He needed to clearly distinguish the faces and basic information of these extraordinaries who stood at the peak of the world. Truthfully speaking, there were over 100 people in this high-level conference, including the spectators. For Luo Nan, who wasn't good at interpersonal relationships, it was a bit difficult to clearly remember so many faces. At this time, you need a deck of cards. Blood Demon sent over an electronic file. It was a copy of the classic extraordinary poker card set that he claimed he was going to release. Yes, it was the version that included Gong Qi and Jin Tong. He flipped through it and found that the index was quite complete. After a brief search, he found out that Romanus was the 2 of spades. He belonged to a more comprehensive or dominant extraordinary. Sasito, on the other hand, was the 3 of clubs. He was a classic psychic. Not only did Blood Demon provide the information, he also took on the responsibility of explaining. Basically, the circle in the middle of the round table is arranged according to the 16 strongest extraordinaries. Of course, some people basically won't appear in this kind of occasion, so it's only natural that there will be more and more people. Just as Blood Demon had said, there were 2 criteria for the strongest 16. One was to include all the flower A cards and character cards, and the other was to slightly relax the criteria, and also include the number 10 card for even goalkeepers. No matter which criteria were used, the core area of the round table was occupied by these 16 to 20 people in this highest level meeting. The other people's seats were more random. Plus, this was a virtual venue. Everyone here wasn't a primary school student, so the seating arrangement was even more chaotic. Under Blood Demon's intimate explanation, Luo Nan immediately gave up on the delusion of recognizing everyone. He just looked at the card deck and examined the people in the core circle first. It didn't matter if there were 20 people or 16 people, not everyone was present. Luo Nan counted. There were only 18 seats in the core circle, but there were only 13 people, including himself, that was all. The Ability User Society occupied a considerable portion of these people: Abner, the current president of headquarters, the convener of the meeting, the host, and the King of Spades. Vice President Maluan, who Luo Nan had fought with for a short period of time. He was a powerful fleshly expert. He was the Jack of Hearts. Constance Dalei, the mystic and mental side. He was the master of enchantments. He was the Jack of Clubs. Yes, President Ouyang could be counted as well. This was the Jack of Spades. Luo Nan waved his hand, and Ouyang Chen adjusted his glasses and smiled in response. Her Majesty Empress Wu was behind President Ouyang this time. Her head was still lowered as she read her book. She didn't pay attention to Luo Nan at all. The remaining people Luo Nan was more familiar with were Blood Demon and Black Lion. One of these two had the 10 of hearts, and the other had the 10 of diamonds. Both of them had the nature of a goalkeeper. Black Lion was a bit further away, but he waved his hand at Luo Nan in greeting. Luo Nan wasn't familiar with the remaining people, but even with his meager knowledge, he had long heard of their great names. Of course, there were two leaders of secret orders among them. Impartial First Ablatum, the Ace of Spades. Speaking of which, this wasn't the first time Luo Nan had dealings with this person. Back at the flagship store of Frost River Reality, when he wiped out the main force of the Order of Justice's branch, Luo Nan had made contact with this person through space. Of course, President Ouyang and Her Majesty Empress Wu were the main combatants back then. But who would have thought that this powerful ruler of the most powerful secret order was actually a woman who looked gentle and amiable? Directions were not distinguishable within the virtual venue. If the host, Abner, was facing the north, then the impartial First Ablatum was facing the west. He was facing Luo Nan at a small angle. He cast his gaze over at this time. It seemed that he was observing the changes in Luo Nan's expression. He was extremely focused and interested. High Lord Secret Deed, Ace of Hearts. This old gentleman looked to be quite old. His hair was snow white, and the quality of his hair was quite hard. It stood up very tenaciously. A white beard grew by the side of his mouth, and it was neatly groomed. He looked hale and hearty. He kept flipping through the materials. His eyelids were drooping, and his expression was calm. Luo Nan couldn't see anything else. The only thing that was rather eye-catching was the several dark lines on his face. They looked like faded tattoos, but they didn't look like patterns. As for why Luo Nan could see them so clearly, aside from the degree of restoration of the virtual venue itself, it was also because this old gentleman was on the other side of Luo Nan. He was sandwiched between Blood Demon and Luo Nan. Even though the diameter of the central round table was enormous, the distance between each side should be quite wide. But Luo Nan thought about Blood Demon's previous proposal, which was flatly rejected by Blood Demon. Luo Nan couldn't help but feel that something was off. High Lord Secret Deed minded his own business, flipping through the materials. This gave Luo Nan a buffer and leeway to think. They were both old men. The one who was as old as High Lord Secret Deed, or even older, should be Necromancer. This person was the J of Clubs. She looked to be a level lower than the junior Constance, but she was quite a dangerous character. Her head was nearly half bald. She had very few strands of hair, and she didn't even have many eyebrows left. She glared at Luo Nan with a very unfriendly gaze. Then there was Mao Jingya, Director Mao. In a sense, he was the most powerful capitalist in the world. He was the K of Hearts. Luo Nan had never interacted with him before, but he barely knew him. There were also two other people whom Luo Nan had never met before. One of them was the number 2 figure of the Order of Justice, High Priest Lanier. He was the K of Clubs. Legend had it that he was a powerful extraordinary who specialized in entering dreams. He was able to steal away a person's soul while they were asleep. The other person was a powerful person who belonged to the Eye of Secret Deed in name. He was the emissary of Hell, Apollon. His card position was the J of Diamonds. He looked very young, around 30 years old at most. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was so gloomy and cold that it made people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. Luo Nan had heard that this person was absolutely not someone who was easy to deal with. He was normally arrogant and unruly. He always listened to orders but never listened to orders. Luo Nan didn't know why he had come to the conference today. As for the few people who didn't come, Luo Nan flipped through the deck of cards. He determined that they either belonged to the Star Alliance and the military, possessing the nature of public authority. This included Lieutenant General Joseph, the cornerstone of the Aerospace Army, and Dongsheng, who had been overseeing in city for many years, and the retired high-ranking officer of the Star Alliance, Bai Hao. They could come or not come. Or they were powerful people from the wilderness who would never participate in the conference. This included the clown Robbie, the formidable Rust Steel of the Northern Territory. Oh, and there was also Poseidon. As for the true gods and the Pope, they didn't come today. That was a different story. While Luo Nan was sizing up these people were sizing him up as well. These people weren't the only ones sizing up Luo Nan. No matter what Luo Nan said just now, he was still the focal point of the entire venue. The heated discussion from before did not come back to life because of his suggestion of everyone continuing. The venue returned to silence once more. It was hard to stir up any more waves. There was no other direction other than to officially proceed. Only now did Luo Nan have the leisure to look at the agenda. The first 2 items on the agenda were related to Gong Qi, the search for the murderer and the filling of the power vacuum after Gong Qi's death. Both of them could be considered resolved. Next was the 3rd item. The seemingly academic item proposed by Lord Secret Deed. Luo Nan's gaze shifted to the side. Lord Secret Deed was still flipping through the documents in his hands. He was calm, focused, and solemn. Abner began to push forward. Then we will now move on to the 3rd item on the agenda. Lord Secret Deed, please inform us of the latest observations and research results of the abyssal region. The data inside corresponds to the special nature of supernatural powers. It is highly specialized and exceedingly precious. The relevant documents have already been sent to everyone before the conference. Do you still want to read them? Abner displayed an exceptionally respectful attitude, even though the two were about the same age. It's just that we aren't sure which is the cause and which is the effect. In particular, if we believe in the logic that the exhaust emissions from the breathing of humans and livestock will cause global warming, then it will be even harder to distinguish the position of cause and effect. The master of the secret deed spoke unhurriedly. He took care of the priority and urgency extremely well. It was very easy for people to understand the key points within his words. Luo Nan immediately knew that this old gentleman was more inclined to believe that the changes in the abyssal region were the cause and the aberration was the effect. It was just that he didn't explicitly state it due to his strictness. The perfectly good agenda inexplicably turned into a private conversation between the master of the secret deed and Luo Nan. However, the people present were able to accept this mode. Any situation that made it convenient for them to observe and examine Luo Nan was acceptable. Needless to say, the master of the secret deed touched upon the 2 explosive topics of the abyssal region and aberration. Luo Nan's interest was piqued. Let's not talk about the observation of the abyssal region. The aberration process of the Earth's biosphere. How is it quantified? Of course it's the number and spread range of the aberration infected. Blood Demon opened his mouth to speak in support. He exposed his position in an instant. The number. Is there any data? The statistical data is basically reliable? Blood Demon answered, but he himself wasn't too sure. After all, the current research on aberration was not deep enough. Traditional statistical techniques and sample selection might not conform to reality. Luo Nan didn't pursue the master of the secret deed. Mathematics wasn't his strong suit. He simply raised a question. Speaking of which, looking at the master of the secret deed's appearance, he didn't really want to give him or the other extraordinaries present a course in statistical analysis. Everyone was very realistic. It was just as Luo Nan had said before. They just wanted to hear the conclusion. Guesses were fine. Then, the performance of the trend line is. Luo Nan was suspicious of asking a question he already knew the answer to. It continues to rise. The master of the secret deed raised his head. His gaze started from Luo Nan's face, sweeping across the entire round table and even the venue. The data for this material only ends on the 31st of December 2096. In fact, since the beginning of this year, the trend line has completely entered an exponential growth mode. It behaves more and more like a virus that has gone out of control. It should be said that the range and quantity of the infection have already gone out of control. Is there any clear evidence? Abner asked with a frown. The master of the secret deed didn't respond. But on the other side of the master of the secret deed, the young white man who had been sitting quietly all this time, the emissary of hell, Apollon, casually raised his hand. Here. Mr. Apollon? Abner's frown deepened. Apollon raised his head. His eyes were like burning charcoal, radiating a heat that made one's heart palpitate. His words were ice cold to the bone. The measurable infection rate of the citizens has exceeded 10%. It has exceeded the scope of control. Starting today, Haas City will abandon all measures to control the aberration infection. This will save medical and survival resources to deal with the following events. That's all. Chapter 1100. The conference hall was a bit numb for a time. There were quite a few people who needed to adjust their state of mind in time. Many people had seen Lord Secret Deed's proposal, and they had watched the exchange between Lord Secret Deed and Luo Nan as if it were a lively event. The impact was not that strong. After all, they had experienced similar scenes many times. In recent years, both the inner world and the secular world revolved around the problem of distortion. They carried out in-depth discussions and even attacked each other. Some people said that the distortion continued to deepen. Some people said that the situation was turning for the better. Everyone had their reasons, and everyone had their reasons. There had never been a clear winner. Including the group of extraordinaries present, most of them still viewed the problem of the aberrations as a politicized operation of an academic problem. Throughout the year, they wished they could say that the aberrations had gone out of control at least once a day. It was nothing more than a way to fight for resources and guide them in the right direction. Over the years, from top to bottom, this was basically how things had been played. It had become a routine. But at this time, someone suddenly said, "The wolf is really here." Even if the wolf's bloody maw was right in front of their faces, everyone had to rub their eyes, right? Most people shifted their attention to Apollon for the first time ever since Luo Nan arrived at the conference hall. This powerful genius called himself the emissary of hell. Actually, if Luo Nan hadn't created so many explosive topics in the past few hours, Apollon's participation in the summit conference would have become quite the explosive point. This young extraordinaire was born in the new continent and had been involved in gangs since he was young. He had a wealth of experience, and his methods were ruthless. He had made countless enemies, but none of them were his match. He had once single-handedly founded a secret order, the Apocalypse, and was honored as the Son of God. Perhaps the Son of Satan? His title wasn't important. What was important was that he was a true awakened talent. His talent was so great that no one knew when he became an extraordinary. Apollon's greatest achievement so far was to unite the gangs, vagrants, and other messy fellows of the new continent. He used messy methods to gain substantial control over Eagle City in the south-central part of the new continent. He renamed it Armageddon Town, and the battlefield of the legendary Armageddon War was shortened to Ha City. It was also the world-famous City of Sin. The Star Alliance Committee actually pinched their noses and accepted it. Perhaps that place wasn't any better to begin with? It was also possible that the High Lord of the Secret Contract had promptly challenged him and won the battle, putting the reins on him. No matter what was said, Apollyon himself was a top-notch extraordinary in the inner world. In the secular world, he was also a world-famous great demon king and great dictator. His enemies were countless, and his fans were also innumerable. The announcement made by the Grand Governor of Ha City was no different from a formal administrative order. Regardless of whether it was the reality of the infection rate or the follow-up policies, both left the participants with basic knowledge of social governance speechless. Even the host, Abner, was taken aback. He was one of the most powerful people in the world, and he was also good at using his power. The information he had was a level higher than most of the people present. He knew a little about the situation in Ha City, but he didn't expect Apollon to reveal it so openly. Moreover, the data that was exposed was much worse than what he knew. Because of this, Abner had to bite the bullet and confirm it. Mr. Apollon, this is a very serious matter. Although this isn't the Parliament or the Administrative Department, Apollon's eyelids drooped and he didn't respond at all. It was as if he had come to the meeting today just to say that. Abner wanted to say more, but at this time, another voice rang out. It came from a seat behind the High Lord of the Secret Contract. Mr. President, may I say a few words? Abner looked over and saw one of the three extraordinary in the old subcontinent, Bat Guru. This skinny, middle-aged man, who looked like an ascetic monk, presided over Tin City. He faced the southern part of the subcontinent, which had almost completely become a wilderness after the Third War. He continued to reclaim the land, and at the same time, he had to resist the attacks of Brahma City in the north, Guru Dem and Shakar, two extraordinary who dreamed of unifying the subcontinent. His days were difficult, but he had perseverance and perseverance. Therefore, many people thought that the card deck had somewhat underestimated him by giving him the number 9 of spades. Abner naturally had no reason to refuse, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. At this time, I'm afraid, sure enough, Bat Guru's expression was cold. His words were concise and clear. At present, it seems that the aberration infection has also gone out of control in Tin City. Our detection rate has already exceeded 8%. In fact, the actual situation can only be worse due to the limitations of our detection ability. The stiff and numb atmosphere in the venue showed signs of loosening. However, there was a crackling sound of fire. Everyone understood that the ability to detect mutated infections was the same in both Xicheng and Ha City. Perhaps it could be said that the entire world was no better. The massive number of infected people in the secondary stage was a cruel test for the technology and financial resources of all the major cities. That was not all. Bat Guru hadn't finished his speech. His gaze crossed the central round table and stared at a person on the side. It's not just Tin City. Brahma City has maliciously used phenomena such as the red tide to attack Tin City's defense line. However, their methods are crude and terrible. On the other hand, Shakar, Dem, and the others have taken advantage of administrative and religious convenience to carry out improper propaganda about the aberration, calling it a Brahma's test. It has become a trend in the subcontinent. The degree of infection in Brahma City can only be higher than in Tin City. You're talking nonsense. Today, the eloquent Guru Dem of Brahma City was absent for some reason. Only Shakar, who was known as the Grand Master of Breathing, had come. Though Shakar was an expert in breathing techniques, his eloquence wasn't that great. He just gave a dry reply and didn't say anything else. The extraordinaries in the meeting had their own judgment as to whether or not they believed him. There was no need for others to do it. However, someone discovered at this time that the most active people in the meeting room had practically formed a string. They were roughly in the position opposite of Abner. Lord Michison and Luo Nan were in the middle. Blood Demon and Apollon were on either side. It was hard not to think, do these people have some sort of tacit understanding? It was at this time that Lord Mitchison slightly shifted his gaze. He bypassed Apollon on the left and cast his gaze towards the next seat. He didn't say anything, but the one he was looking at, Black Lion, had an ugly expression on his face. One could read the meaning of, "a pot is falling from the sky," from his face. But he couldn't fool this topic even if he played the fool. In the end, he could only spread his hands. "Don't look at me. You all know the situation over there." That was right. Things had gone out of control over there long ago. It seemed like the tacit connection was going to continue to extend. Lord Mitchison took the initiative to call a halt at this time. He called a halt by turning his head to seek Luo Nan's opinion. "I'm afraid we'll stray off topic if we continue talking." Luo Nan's mind had wandered a bit when Apollon and the others had voiced their confirmation one after another. Lord Mitchison had called his attention back. Lord Mitchison laughed. "I don't really understand what you're talking about when it comes to distortion. But it's not purely a matter of natural phenomena and biology. There's also a bit of sociological probing. Yes, there's also a warning. It should be done." Blood Demon gave him a thumbs up. Luo Nan rolled his eyes back. "It should be done like this." Lord Mitchison placed the information in his hands on the virtual desktop. "Speaking up to this point, I'm very apologetic." The topic text pursued objectivity, so it didn't elaborate much on the practical meaning. Of course, when I formed the text, I did indeed have the intention of deliberately simplifying it. Otherwise, I'm afraid that this topic would have to undergo more careful discussions and require more extensive participation. The accuracy could be increased. But if I did that, there wouldn't be enough time. Lord Mitchison looked all around. He was neither fast nor slow, communicating with practically every extraordinary present with his gaze. From this moment on, he had completely taken away Abner's role as host. He made the topic of the conference change in the direction he wished for. The rising trend line is the truth reflected in the data. The loss of control in Hus City, Tin City, and South Central Africa is the truth of social governance. But they aren't comprehensive. There are many people in the conference room right now. It can still be said that the loopholes in the defense lines of relatively backward and chaotic regions aren't much. After all, the current state of autonomy of the city-states and the restriction of the flow of population make it so that the predicament of 2 or 3 nodes won't affect the overall situation of human society. I don't want to refute this. After all, this is a complicated problem of social governance. It's more appropriate to hand it over to a more professional person to handle. There should be people here who have a bigger headache than me. However, the rising trend line still has other effects. It affects us, ability users like us, and there aren't any defense lines or nodes because it directly affects us. Almost as soon as Lord Mitchison finished his sentence, Wan Luhua, who had been sitting quietly in the area directly behind him, spoke in a timely manner. "Since the second half of January, the 4th phase of the Grandmaster of Combat project that I'm hosting has reached 7 people with physical awakening. The probability of awakening has increased by 600% compared to the same period last year. Of course, this is also because there was only 1 awakening last year. The success rate was too low. However, the period from January to April is indeed the period with the highest number of awakened people since the establishment of the Grandmaster of Combat project. The frequency of their appearance has even exceeded that of the original Golden Period. At the same time, in the collaborative project with the military's Team AB, a new round of experiments has a high chance of helping a burner become an extraordinary. The results will probably be out in the first half of the year." "Is it Tian Bang?" someone asked. Wan Luhua did not explicitly state it. He directly summarized, "Compared to the previous 3 phases, our training method has improved, but it isn't decisive. We have to consider the influence of the external environment. Isn't that a good thing?" Marlon, the first vice president of the association, joked with Blood Demon. "It's just that the release date of the new edition of the deck of cards has to be pushed back. Do you have the cash flow?" Blood Demon replied with a chuckle. Lord Mitchison's fingertips lightly tapped on the table, just like in the real world. In the midst of the tapping sound, he said softly, "That's the good side." However, the spiritual side that is more closely connected to the environment of the abyss, especially the spiritual side of the architect and above, doesn't seem to be that ideal. Don't you feel it? Marlon opened his mouth subconsciously, but no sound came out. He turned to look at Abner beside him. When he did not get a clear hint, he looked at Constance, who was on the other side. The latter's face was still covered under the hood, so nothing could be seen. However, his slender fingers were intertwining subconsciously, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Marlon pursed his lips. All he heard was Lord Mitchison speak at his usual speed. Since January 1st, there have been over 70 people of the architect and above who have suffered the backlash of the abyss during their regular cultivation. The most trouble has occurred when experiencing the turbulent interference of the abyss, and the most obvious. Next is the attempt at the out-of-body state. In addition, Professor Luo, Old Yu's body hasn't been too well recently. Luo Nan spent half a second to match Old Yu, and he nodded silently. Psychics are too sensitive. Their skeletal structures are relatively weak, so they are easily affected. Also, Morgana, on your side. Who was Morgana? Luo Nan was baffled when he saw the death shaman's gloomy and miserable gaze shoot over. Oh, it's this one. The death shaman did not speak, but under these circumstances, not speaking was a tacit agreement. It was a bit far-fetched to talk about the cultivation data of the architect and Old Yu. But when it came to the death shaman, with his status as an extraordinary, the nature of the matter was completely different. Noise gradually rose in the conference hall. During this time, another person asked a question. It was Mao Jingye, who sat diagonally across from Luo Nan, to the side of the empty seat of the Pope of the 100 Gatherings. The Lord has been emphasizing the point of January 1st, because of the light of the polar domain. Lord Secret Deed answered as if it was a matter of course, and Luo Nan's eyelids twitched a bit. However, what the High Lord of Secret Deeds said was completely different from what Luo Nan first thought. The first light of the polar domain occurred in the early 50s of this century. To be precise, it should be in the year 52. Lord Secret Deed asked for the opinions of others. The only people present who could respond to him were Abner and the Death Shaman. The Death Shaman looked at him with cold eyes, but Abner nodded. It was in the year 52. It's just that the inner world had yet to take shape at that time. The cultivation of ability users had just begun, so there weren't many who could sense it. There were practically no living ones. Abner subconsciously looked at Luo Nan when he spoke to this point. Gong Qi, who had once experienced it, had been erased by this person. Lord Secret Deed nodded slightly. From then on, from my personal experience, Earth really did become more and more suitable for cultivation. It wasn't just because everyone had free time after the war. Another 7 or 8 years passed. It was the year 59, right? In the year 59, Morgana, you psychics were the first to discover the abyssal region. Then people like me also came into contact with it. The Death Shaman's stiff, wrinkled face twitched for a moment. That was definitely not a good memory for her. Lord Secret Deed also sighed with emotion. It's truly marvelous. Why is there such a level and such a form of power? It easily swallowed up ignorant people, yet it pushed us to knock on the threshold of the limits of the human body. Did it always exist while we were ignorant? Or did it only complete its primitive accumulation at that time and truly appear? Chapter 1101. No one could answer this question. The High Lord of Secret Deed did not expect anyone to give him an answer. He just continued to speak unhurriedly. The Abyss region is already like this, let alone the polar domain. In fact, if it wasn't for the first light of polar domain incident, how would ignorant people like us know that outside the Abyss region, there was such a seemingly pure and illusory, yet obscure and unexplainable level? Most of the people present were distressed. This was especially so for the spiritual-type transcendents. Basically, they could break through the influence of the turbulence of the abyss region and enter the polar domain. In fact, this was one of the most advanced techniques when fighting against opponents of the same level. It was very difficult for the power stirred up in the abyss region to effectively affect the polar domain. Although the structure of the polar domain itself did not possess direct power, it was especially easy to cause resonance in the abyss region, achieving the effect of unifying thousands. However, the polar domain was illusory and difficult to rely on, let alone the structure. There were very few who could achieve this. Because of this, when Luo Yuan's dimensional crossbow appeared, even if he had never been known for his extraordinary power, he was immediately promoted to the top of the transcendence. In any case, the polar domain represented the highest level of the inner world, whether it was in cultivation or research. Although this field of research was intentionally or unintentionally put aside most of the time. The High Lord of Secret Deed continued this practice and did not put too much effort into the polar domain. Soon, he returned to a more realistic scale. In the next 40 years, the number of ability users grew steadily, and the number of architects who could use the power of the abyss region also continued to increase. With the architects, there were the transcendents who could break through the limits. This was a seemingly smooth upward curve. This process is not reflected in today's meeting documents. It is true that we did not have effective observation conditions and quantification methods in the early days. What I have said is just speculation. It is just that this speculation is more in line with my intuition. I think everyone here feels the same. No one refuted, so the High Lord of Secret Deed continued. We can say that since the appearance of the abyss region, it has maintained a relatively stable state of interaction with the real world for a long time, in a plateau period. At least from the late 1980s, when I began to consciously observe and record, until now, it has mostly been like this. There have been a few small fluctuations in the middle, but almost all of them corresponded to specific events. This kind of artificial disturbance, to put it bluntly, is just a slightly stronger noise, and has almost no effect on the trend line. Until January 1st of this year, when the second light of the polar domain appeared. The participants exchanged glances subtly or exchanged information directly under the table in other ways. Unexpectedly, the High Lord of Secret Deed added another sentence. Perhaps the white nightmare from 10 days ago should also be counted in as well. Luo Nan blinked. There's also a daytime nightmare? Many people's interest rose once again. Speaking of the light of the polar domain, it was true that the level of the incident was extremely high, and it had also caused quite a bit of disturbance in the inner world. But after all, it was something that had happened almost half a year ago. In terms of freshness, how could it compare to the daytime nightmare incident that had stirred up more than half of the earth? Death, which did not have to act, her drooping eyelids were also half closed. She squinted her eyes and stared at him. Daytime nightmare. Have you figured out the source? No, I didn't. Its origin and related mechanism of action were not so easy to confirm. Now, we can confirm two things. The first is the impact on the spiritual level. Of course. The second is that it didn't go through the amplification and bonus of the abyss region. It also didn't have any obvious external effects. It directly burst forth from within the sea of consciousness. The High Lord of Secret Deed spoke, but he looked at Luo Nan. According to Professor Luo's cage theory, the sea of consciousness is nothing more than the interaction between the self-cages of humans. There is nothing else besides this. According to this theory, such an intense impact couldn't have been a consciousness resonance of all the humans of the entire world, right? Luo Nan laughed, but he did not give a clear response. It was impossible for him to explain to the group of extraordinaries present that it was because he had accidentally triggered the enormous information of the Sunwell Extreme Prison. He himself was unable to bear it, so he opened the floodgates to release the floodwaters from the hidden dropper buried in the spiderweb of the altar, but at this time, a similar thought inevitably emerged in his mind. Is this old man targeting me because he failed to cooperate with me? The High Lord of Secret Deed didn't really want Luo Nan to explain. He just spoke his own opinion. If it wasn't resonance, then the so-called daytime nightmare was certainly an external effect. It was just that the source of the light of the polar domain could be barely confirmed. Its method of use was more hidden. Of course, it also possessed the power to shake the world. The daytime nightmare can affect billions of living beings on the planet at the same time. The light of the polar domain can reach far and wide. It can radiate all the way to Europa's forward operating base and even the distant starry sky. I don't find it strange at all that the light of the polar domain drives the trend line to rise and fall. What's strange is that they actually don't have a direct connection to the abyssal region. Then the possibility of the so-called abyssal region-specific radiation coming from itself is quite questionable. And if we consider the interstellar level, then the main cause of the change in the trend line can be attributed to the biological influence on Earth. There is an insurmountable chasm within. It's like human breathing causing global warming. The corner of the High Lord of Secret Deeds' lips split open amidst his white stubble. Rather than this, I would rather believe that there is an external source of radiation. An enormous source of radiation is continuously drawing closer to us and displaying its effect. All right. The High Lord of Secret Deed wanted to directly overrule the abyssal region-specific radiation and the abyssal region-specific radiation. He wanted to determine them as the result and not the cause. Or could it be that he was just more interested in the source of radiation? At this moment, even though the High Lord of Secret Deed was the main character, at least half of the people in the venue turned their gazes to Luo Nan. This was because everyone naturally believed that the High Lord of Secret Deeds suddenly tossed out the setting of an external source of radiation and the complete overthrow of the cause and effect of the trend line. It simply pointed to the new plane behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan frowned. But it wasn't because the theory of a source of radiation was seriously disadvantageous to him. It was because of another reason. Blood Demon didn't know what Luo Nan was thinking. He gave Luo Nan a meaningful glance in the venue and sent him private messages under the stage. Listen down. Listen down. Listen down. Luo Nan's brows slightly relaxed as he smiled at Blood Demon. But he soon retracted his smile. He just heard the High Lord of Secret Deed continue speaking with a calm tone. If there is such a source of radiation. Actually, I would rather believe that there are multiple sources of radiation. The Death Witch knocked on the table, clearly expressing her impatience. Secret Deed, I didn't come here to listen to your big conjecture of the century. What in the world do you mean? The High Lord of Secret Deed wasn't annoyed. He laughed. You've lived for a long time. You've seen many things. You're very accurate. You need to let others see things a bit more clearly. What I mean is that in a short period of less than 40 years, we are unable to determine whether or not the light of polar domain is the periodic effect of the same source of radiation. Not to mention the daytime nightmare. Its nature is quite different from the light of polar domain. Actually, the essence is the same. It's just that the channel of effect is different. At the very least, this was the case for the last 2 times. Luo Nan corrected himself in his mind, but he had to explain clearly why the wraith sign guided in the light of the polar domain, but the light of the polar domain was guided in through the misty maze, and the light of the day nightmare. Well, the latter part made more or less sense, but he was unable to understand the former logic. No matter what, this deviation was beneficial to Luo Nan at his current stage. He could shut his mouth, but he didn't feel too comfortable doing so. It was the feeling of going against one's will when encountering a wrong question. Well, the root of the problem wasn't here. While Luo Nan was calculating in his mind, the High Lord of Secret Deed gradually entered the main topic. The first light of polar domain occurred 15 years after the distortion pollution, 10 years after the end of the Third War, and 7 years after the appearance of the Abyss region. During this time, it was gradually possible for human cultivation and self-evolution. Of course, there was also the deep blue world. The Death Witch's drooping eyelids froze a bit when she heard this sensitive word. There were quite a few others who had the same reaction. However, the High Lord of Secret Deeds' words flowed smoothly, not giving others the chance to interrupt. That was the first time we had the concept of a plane in reality. Even though it was just a legend floating on the ocean at that time. There's no smoke without fire. There's no smoke without fire. There's no smoke without fire. I'm inclined to believe that the source of the first light of polar domain was there. As a plane of spacetime, the node of its appearance is extremely close to the origin of the distortion. It also overlaps with a series of subsequent events. More importantly, it has this mass. Of course, this is just a guess. The atmosphere within the conference room was roughly equivalent to the tense atmosphere when Luo Nan and Black Lion first chatted on the pool deck multiplied by 10. The participants really didn't expect Old Man's secret deed, who was about to attack Luo Nan's face, to suddenly turn around and stab Li Wei in the chest. Even Black Lion, Wang Yong, and the others, who had experienced similar events, weren't any better. This was different from the influence of Luo Nan's attitude at the time. It must be known that the Eye of Secret Deed stood behind the High Lord of Secret Deed. Even if it was the weakest organization among the three great secret orders, that was only relative. Secret Deed, Secret Deed. Who knew who else signed a contract with the High Lord of Secret Deed besides Apollon and Wan Luhua? If this person wanted to make things difficult for Li Wei. The group of extraordinaries were frantically adding scenes in their minds. The High Lord of Secret Deed floated over in the next second. As for the second light of polar domain at the beginning of the year, the deep blue world and the local spacetime have already been anchored to completion. It has been relatively stable in recent years, so the possibility isn't high. But there are others. For example, Professor Luo's new plane. Luo Nan furrowed his brows and pondered for a long time. He raised his head to glance when he heard someone mention him, but he didn't respond. The High Lord of Secret Deeds skipped over again, but there are many other things that point in the same period. For example, the research that I and a few friends jointly invested in. It involves the species in the wilderness surrounding Spring City and Xia City, as well as the changes in the spacetime environment. There's also the Gate of Truth that the Order of Justice once clamored about. I don't know if these recent hot topics point to one place, two places, or multiple places. But they can indeed serve as a few omens. They can strengthen the possibility of the idea of an external source of radiation. All right, this was very objective and fair. The participants were alarmed for no reason. Then again, why was everyone so sensitive? Why did they think of the possibility of falling out with Li Wei at every turn? Also, why did High Lord Secret Deed drag Abner back to the topic that he had just avoided with great difficulty? In the end, who was on the same side as who? And at this time, Blood Demon, who was clearly suspected to be an accomplice, opened his mouth once more. He clicked his tongue repeatedly. Old man, you're getting old. You're getting more and more wordy. After listening to you for half a day, you've deviated from the main topic. I clearly remember that you were talking about the distortion going out of control. In the end, after talking for so long, it seemed like you were trying to find the source, but the result is still so unclear. Give me a solution. Blood Demon's technique of playing the supporting role was quite stiff. He forcefully pulled the topic back. However, this indeed represented the thoughts of a considerable portion of the participants. Amidst the discussions in the venue, Mao Zhengye, Chairman Mao, frowned and said, "My lord, do you mean to investigate the source of the radiation and see if it's at a new plane or something deeper? But this doesn't solve the real problem." As the world's most successful extraordinary businessman, Mao Zhengye's thoughts were clear and sharp. So what if we can find the source? A radiation source that could change the Earth's environment could be considered a so-called plane for the time being. It could not be pushed away or sealed, let alone changed its nature. So what if it was found? This is a threat similar to the Great Ice Age or the impact of asteroids. Can humans avoid or reverse such threats with their current development? Of course not. Lord Secret Deed answered calmly. He even added, actually, the possibility of the distortion going out of control is the cause of all changes up until now. It can't be said that it's completely impossible. Death Witch sneered, then what the hell is this long list of things? Lord Secret Deed faintly smiled. He was about to speak when someone raised his hand. Such a habitual action could only be Zio's student, Luo Nan. How about I say a few words? Luo Nan's voice wasn't loud, but his gesture of raising his hand was a bit more eye-catching. When the participants saw and heard these things one after another, the noise within the venue clearly subsided. Soon, it was completely erased. Then the silent and dense atmosphere continued to persist. At this moment, many people felt a sense of déjà vu before their eyes. A similar feeling was only completely broken when Luo Nan spoke once more. Luo Nan didn't exchange pleasantries. He didn't wait for Abner, the nominal host, to signal. He directly spoke. I feel that I need to say a few words. The distortion must be dealt with, and the radiation source must be investigated. We are unable to push it away, but we must study it, adapt to it, and even use it to complete our cultivation. We must allow this new era to continue. This is how it should be. But the crux of the problem right now is something that everyone seems to have overlooked. The radiation that stirred up the Abyss region and induced the supernatural power does indeed have a certain correlation with the current situation of the distortion going out of control. But are they really related? Is it like what Lord's secret deed said? Is it a true cause that brings about a double result? Or is it a coincidence that it happened at the same time? Or is it someone's deliberate design to confuse the public? Can you guys deny this possibility? Luo Nan looked around the venue. He was unconsciously like Lord's secret deed. He made eye contact with all the participants. He didn't have the time to discern the details in everyone's eyes. He just needed to let these people understand his meaning. At the same time, he deliberately enunciated his words. Let me put it more clearly. Are the Abyss region and the distortion really related? Are the changes in their trends really caused by the same cause? I think not. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.